Welcome to Talking Cannabis. Good morning, everybody. I'm here with Kenny. And today we have Sam and Etienne on. Unfortunately, we don't have Mel Frank and Tom Alexander. Their wives have scurried them away to do other things. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
I am fine.
Good deal. You've been rushing around trying to find a splitter in the last 20 minutes?
Yeah, I only had all week to go get us a headphone splitter and failed to do so. So this morning I ran around and tried to get one.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And Etienne, you just got back from Alaska that was following your trip. That's some pretty amazing photography you were sending back. You said you didn't have time to do diddly. Hey, man, go all the way to Alaska and didn't do diddly? What the hell?
Well, Bo Diddley wasn't there. So instead, I was very fortunate to go all around Alaska on a boat. But every city that we stopped in, there was cannabis. So I actually got invited to a rainforest garden farms in Juneau. And I actually got to go into their adult use dispensary, check it out, as well as they invited me to the garden. So I actually got to go to the garden, and oddly enough, funny enough, in this beautiful magazine called Cannabis Business Times, in this latest issue, as I just flipped through, and there is the garden that I just went to in Juneau, Alaska.
Wow. Serendipity.
Serendipity, awesome. Indeed. It's beautiful. It's a nice ad for Fluence, who does nice LED lights, and the garden was wonderful. The co-founder of Rainforest Farms is Giano Barrett, and he gave us a wonderful tour, and it was very interesting to see compared to what we're doing here up, a little down in the lower 48. Everything is still very bootstrapped there, so everybody is doing their best to step up their game. Only a few of them are actually growing and producing what they're doing. These guys are. Others rely on the distribution setup. But I got to hear some of the horror of the realities, such as when they need to send something off for testing, it costs a $700 plane ticket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when you try to deliver a product to some of the far out provinces as well, getting into that federal issue of can you fly marijuana?
I was very unaware of the depth of issues that were there, and I was fascinated by them because it is still very rugged there in Alaska. However, in Juneau and Ketchikan and Skagway, they all had dispensaries, and they were all popular. I was in one in, I do believe, Ketchikan, and the first place we went to right off the ship, they only had 2 varieties because they grew their own and manufactured it. And they had 6 varieties yesterday, but the other ships had come in and they had taken them out. But the most popular thing there, they said, is edibles, because the majority of people who come through are tourists, and the majority of tourists are on boats. And so the majority of them prefer, since they have a long period in a same area, those tend to become more popular. So another dispensary that I went to in that same town, they actually purchased their cannabis through distributors. So they had like 8 different types of flowers, ample supply of edibles. I didn't see any type of oil products yet, although Rainforest Farms is working on CO2, putting it into a cartridge form so that people have access to it. But still, they say the majority of people coming through want edibles. So I thought it was pretty fascinating, because down here in the States, it's still predominantly flowers still dominate the landscape. But
do the edibles have to have the milligrams of THC and CBD, et cetera?
And they have to be tested. And so the reality is it's better to buy from a distributor than actually be the manufacturer. So it's interesting how people set themselves up. At the same time, they're doing what they can, because, as I said before, they're all having to bootstrap it. They cannot go get loans. They cannot get investors, and everything they had to do, they have to. It's kind of like California in '96. Everybody's just trying to get on their feet, and everybody's doing their damnedest. And like I said, there's dispensaries in every city, and all you have to do is show your ID. They're in the strip malls. It is so normalized it was beautiful to see. It's not the fear. However, the owners and manufacturers still have to deal with the issue of finding landlords that will even deal with them, when that's a big issue still up there. So even the garden I got to see is small because they're limited by what they can have access to.
Fascinating that their number one customer base is tourism. That's that kind of all the way up there, and that's how it is. That's funny.
Well, it is, but they do see. I asked, what do you see when ships are not here? And they're saying on average of 200 local visits a day.
Wow. Wow,
And
that's really
that's
incredible.
not small. That is a significant drive of market share coming to these towns. And I would have loved to have more time to talk to some of those businesses around to see what type of influence they have. But they were right next to fast food and food joints, and they were hopping.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see the actual figures of how cannabis affects the alcoholism rate in Alaska. I mean, that will be a seriously and the suicide rate. That will be a really calculable figure. That'll be really incredible.
Let's cut to the bone. Did you get Manitus Thunderfuck?
Matanuska? No. In fact, a lot of strains were not there. In fact, I was just reminded that there is no CBD. It is illegal still for dispensaries to sell it, but this is being sold in health food stores. So it is only THC.
Did you see a polar bear?
I did not see a polar bear. I saw lots of other things, but no, it was just the beauty of Alaska, of the glaciers and the ruggedness of everything, and to see what has been carved out and how it's been actually done. And I'm quite amazed at how advanced the cannabis scene is in Alaska, but was also very heartened by the openness and forwardness and the headstrongness of all the people that I saw in these places. I mean, it was just Tuesday. It was just Wednesday at a normal business. Everybody doing it. Nobody was afraid. It was just the tourists that were coming in that seemed to have any type of hesitation. But the bud tenders were all there and willing to assist in any way, shape, or form. And they seemed to be well educated. Majority of genetics seem to be newer, but a lot of genetics tend to be from regional genetics that were up there. And majority of them I have never heard of. So I never saw Matanuska. I did see a Tangy though.
But of course, it's fantastic though, because I think what you're talking about is really understated, because there's been a huge alcoholism problem, especially in these really northern places that
high suicide rate.
Right.
And they have also
messed up long nights, everything. It must be really hard to deal with emotionally. I think pot's going to help a lot of people in Alaska.
A lot of homeless as well, was surprised to see, but they're mostly people that were hardcore alcoholics that have been ostracized by, i.e. their towns or tribes, because there's a lot of
beyond brutal. It's beyond brutal what's going on.
How can you be homeless in Alaska? It just seems like unfathomable.
It was on every other street. It unfortunately looked like down here.
Would not have expected that, you know.
Me neither.
A long time ago, back in Pacific Beach, my girlfriend and I had made a bunch of extra brownies while we were doing the hemp initiative, and we decided one night we were going to go for a sunset walk. So we brought these extra bag of brownies we had and started giving them out to homeless people, asking them up front, hey, you know, do you like cannabis? And they'd smile and say, would you like a brownie? And they'd smile. And it was really weird, because the next day when we walked around, we had so many people like that we wouldn't have expected thanking us and saying things like, oh, I slept last night. It really helped. And it was like, I actually made us sad, because we were like wishing we could do it all the time for them, because we didn't think it would have that much of an impact, if that makes sense. But yeah, cannabis for all.
Yeah, alcoholism is a big scourge up there. So I'm hoping to see some people in time do some studies, because of see, as we saw with Dr. Ryman's study when she did with, you know, seeing cannabis being used as a substitute for alcoholism, so as well as for opiate, etc. So I would love to see over time that sort of pick up, so that we could get some studies out there, because of the high alcoholism rates. Maybe we could see such a steep decline depending on, you know, how things transpire.
Absolutely. A lot of people watching may not realize this, but Dennis Perrone, who was one of the main authors of what became medical cannabis in California, Proposition 215, actually stated numerous times that he used medical cannabis to help him with his alcohol problems, because he was an alcoholic after he came back from Vietnam, and it was cannabis that helped straighten him out.
It did for me. I was a heavy alcoholic after my war, and I could drink a fifth of Jack Daniels in an evening and start into a second bottle.
That's invaluable.
It was cannabis who helped bring me out of that, without a doubt. And I'm forever, you know, besides for my PTSD and my other things, it was the alcohol I was drinking to try to sleep, try to cope with the nightmares and shit like that I was dealing with. And it was, you know, cannabis, hands down, that's changed my life for the positive. I rarely have a drink now. I think I had like one glass of wine on the entire trip at a dinner. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not a fan of the feeling of alcohol anymore. I prefer cannabis, hands down, end of story.
Yeah, it's weird hearing you say that you used to drink excessively. I can't even remember us ever drinking, really, ever.
No, you never really knew me as that. And that's why I had to get out of Morgantown, because I was turning into a lush. I was just, I had issues with the war I was in and what I had done. And, you know, we all have to deal with those issues. And for me, it was, as when you're on the bases, it's easier for you to get alcohol. I mean, Class 6 store with no tax right up the street, I could go buy, you know, fifths of Jack Daniels for the evening, no problem at all, cheap and as easy as it gets. And it's always within walking distance on the base. You don't have to go off base, you know, whereas actually having to, just medicate with cannabis, you had to go off base, or, you know, there's no way I brought it on base, or, you know, I didn't want to fuck around with that. The only time I do that, I would make brownies and bring brownies with me.
You know, it's incredible, though. America has had such a problem with alcohol for a long time, obviously, and I think that cannabis will definitely help to balance the hunger for it. I mean, we're already seeing alcohol sales drop in many of the states where cannabis has become legal, and this is also why, I mean, people watching might not realize this, but there was an old film called Reefer Madness, and 20 plus years ago, I was on the CNN website taking a marijuana quiz, and their question was, who produced the film Reefer Madness? Was it A, the United States government, B, a church group, or C, a group of liquor distillers? And honestly, I got the answer wrong 2 out of 3 times, because I just thought it couldn't be that overt, and it was. So a group of liquor distillers were the main producers behind the propaganda film Reefer Madness, because I'm sure after alcohol prohibition ended, the alcohol producers, better than anybody, realized who their competition was, and realized that hashish candies and cannabis was becoming very popular in the jazz scene, and they saw it as detrimental to their business. So they attacked it. And we're still dealing with alcohol companies coming after cannabis legalization and our efforts to legalize cannabis to this day.
When I was on tour in St. Louis back in the 90s, they were telling us how Anheuser-Busch bought the helicopters and paid for the fuel, and even bought the infrared detectors to fly around St. Louis and actually look for grows. And back in those, there were some of the highest spike in alcohol sales when they were doing that. So they continued to do that for years. So they're also our main proponents in all these states. You know, Kevin Sabat and all these others, I wouldn't be surprised, aren't being funded at some sort of extent from these types of accolades.
Between the alcohol companies and the pharmaceutical companies are the two biggest.
Well, I'd say the third biggest group would be illegal pot growers.
Yeah, they've been pretty loud. There's no question. And surprisingly, that upsets me more than anything, because those were always the people I thought I was fighting for and trying to liberate.
Those are our brethren.
Right. It's holy resistance is what we're dealing with, you know. But it is unfortunate. I mean, I think that while what we're talking about is one of the reasons why I honestly can't wait to see big cannabis step in. I hope Campbell's Soup Company someday stuffs cannabis in a can and sells it for 89 cents at the supermarket, because I hope everybody has access to it someday.
If you've got an endocannabinoid system, which you do, you need it.
Mm-hmm. Can you hear us, Richard? Are you over there? Richard was having a little problems with his camera.
I think it's working. You hear me?
Yes, sir. Good morning. How was Italy?
Good evening.
Hey, I was reading some of the stuff you were posting about CBD on Facebook, and I wanted you to elaborate a little bit. One of the things is that CBD interacts with another drug negatively.
Yeah, it's a CYP 450, a cytochrome P450 inhibitor, as I recall.
What is it inhibiting?
It inhibits absorption of many pharmaceuticals. So the takeaway I had in the post was if you're taking a prescription med, and it says it has a grapefruit warning on it. Usually there's a little label on the side that says don't eat grapefruit when you're taking this med. If it has that, you should also reconsider using CBD as part of the regimen, because it might change the metabolism of those drugs.
It basically will make the drug stick around longer or act faster, or it makes it more potent, basically, which can be harmful for the subject.
Yeah, and it builds up in the system over time. So, a few weeks down the road, you might have way too much of it because of it.
What medications would have that in it? Or do you have any references to some?
Yeah, there's a ton of them. As I recall, it was Pavel. Let me look here. I've seen it on a lot myself, and there's probably a whole list. And this is the CBD inhibits that just the same as the grapefruit would. So some people are
just more predisposed to have the problem depending on their body's chemistry.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not an issue that's talked a lot, especially by pro CBD people. So I wanted to get the word out there because it does could have severe ramifications for some people.
Cyclosporin is another one that grapefruit affects strongly.
Wow. Do you know, Sam, of more interactions that any of the cannabinoids have with any known pharmaceuticals?
THC does.
I don't know if CBD affects cyclosporin for sure. I know grapefruit does, and they have similar mechanisms on what Richard's been talking about.
Right.
I will ask at the office, because we have contraindication forms at our dispensary to make sure that people, because we've had that happen before. In fact, we had one of our city council people's wives actually had a bad reaction to something, and they came down and we actually whipped out the contraindication form, because we need to be aware as dispensary people about what we're putting out there. And if somebody has a contraindication, it's best that we know about it so that we can let other people know about it, so we can spread the information. It's kind of our duty. I would say it is our duty to not only provide the cannabis, we have to provide the education alongside.
Yeah, cyclosporin is taken to suppress your immune system so that you don't reject a new transplanted organ in your body. So when you combine it with grapefruit juice, what it functionally does is make it so that your body is more able to reject. So it makes the cyclosporin stronger. It makes the cyclosporin stronger, excuse me. But it's still not good for you.
Which depresses the immune system even further. So there might be a floor at which they don't want to depress the immune system that you would achieve a lot quicker if you're taking CYP 450 inhibitor.
Wow. Well, I'm sure we're just learning when it comes to a lot of this. As more and more people start experimenting with cannabis and taking Western medicines, they're going to find out, how it works. But I would expect there's a huge margin of safety, because I think this has been going on anyway in the illegal market for decades. No?
Yeah, it does.
For decades, there has not been high CBD varieties, to be honest.
That's a great point. Can I ask you, Sam, how long have we been kind of seeing CBD varieties in the market?
Well, there's always been CBD varieties from industrial hemp, but they only yield 1 or 2% by dry weight. So they were extremely low, but very high in basically CBD only. Whereas varieties that have 10% or more. That wasn't really around until, let me think, maybe very late 80s, early 90s. And I think the first ones were developed in California more like 2000 or somewhere around then.
Well, Lawrence Ringo.
When was that, Richard?
That was not late 90s. I'm not sure. Late 90s. He was living in Colorado before he moved to California.
Yeah, for some reason, I thought it was 2000, but you could be correct easily.
Well, in some ways, I hope there's a lot more of it. I think we're going to see more and more CBD growing now that California is legal and hemp is legal, and people are looking, for ways to make money in the new economy. So they're going to try to do it, even if it's, for any reason whatsoever. I'm sure not this year, next year, we will definitely see more hemp growing in California in 2018. A ton of it. So.
Well, hopefully we'll see some manufacturing start to step up or start to get some investments,
There's 3 or 4 programs starting out in Central California right now that are pretty incredible and large.
Cannabis or hemp?
It's reclassified cannabis. So
I assume it's
the predominant compound is going to be CBD, correct? But it's certainly not the hemp varietals that the 1-2% like the drunkers utilize,
Right. It's not canola.
It's more of a drug producing hemp varietal than a fiber producing varietal.
Wow, that makes sense. Sam, does CBD really have its roots in hemp, or was it a drug plant in this to start off?
The CBD that we developed in late 80s, early 90s was derived from a German hemp variety and a Turkish landrace, which was used for, I think, hemp, but it also did have, if you grew enough plants of it, you would also find plants with moderate THC. So, but we selected individuals that were very high in CBD with practically no THC. And they made a hybrid between those and developed a variety.
And the resulting plants, were they more of a fiber type plant, meaning they were 9 foot tall and looked like a straw?
No, they weren't so extremely tall at all. What they could do is they could be grown outdoors in the UK. And
sure, but they were more a flowering hemp. They expressed more the desirability was in the compounds in the buds, not the fiber of the plant. Correct.
Correct. The fibers had no value, but I guess they could have been collected. It depends how close you grew the variety, whether it would, because all cannabis, if you grow them really, really close, they have a tendency to be more tall and thin and upright. But of course, each variety has its own basic shape, and some look like Christmas trees, and some look like little thin poles. So it depends on the variety and how it's grown.
Sure. So the predominance of hemp being grown in California, should I say, I'm sure in other states it's different. They're more growing let's call it European style, where it's all close together, 100 plants per square foot growing straight up. But over here, it's more grown outdoor plant style.
What they should be doing is growing all female hemp seeds if they want to grow hemp. That way they can collect the fiber, they can do whatever they want, but they won't cause no consultation for their neighbors.
Yeah, I think they're getting a higher. They're not growing that style or that varietal. They're more growing flowering hemp, so to speak. So they look like a traditional marijuana plant or cannabis plant with flowers on it, but the desirability is in the compound within the bud, not really in the fiber.
Well, the problem is half of those plants are males.
So
they're from clones and everything else. They're not even starting from seed. They're getting back to, like you said, some of the Ringo varieties and other things.
Now, I keep hearing problems with pollinations, like in Southern Oregon and Southeastern Oregon.
Most of them aren't starting from seed like that. And flowering style. You know, I seen a post of somebody with a seeding tractor the other day in some, I don't know, Kentucky or Middle America somewhere, and they were just planting seed. You're correct. And lots of them per square foot. So I don't see the apparatus for processing that up and running yet. I mean, where are you going to process all that fiber?
You don't need to convince me. First, you need the infrastructure to receive the materials and process them into either ropes or fibers or pulp or something.
And the cost of production of doing that right now, you can buy it cheaper from a third world country that's been doing this for a century.
There's a question we have in the live chat from Rand Corp. What is the general percentage of CBD found in hemp?
It's less than 1 or 2%.
Wow, on average, I would not have expected that. And what's the highest expressions we've seen in plants? In the high teens?
I've seen over 20%. But are you talking about a man-made bred variety, or a hemp variety, or a wild variety? What are you talking about?
I was speaking man-made, something that we had bred.
Man-made, yeah, over 21%
CBD.
I've seen a lab for 20%. It was still under 0.3% THC. Jay says that Finola gets as high as 6% CBD.
If it's grown Simsimia or if it's grown seeded.
He didn't say, but it's probably Sinsemilla. The thing about all that hemp that you're talking about grown on X-foot centers, grown like weed in California, is that that's actually illegal. The way the law, Proposition 64 was written, it has to be grown European field style to close planting, certified cultivars only, 0.3% THC. And the CBD was given to the marijuana growing side. So it'll be interesting to see. Maybe CDFA has completely changed the rules and they allow that, but I haven't seen anything except people growing it the way they're not supposed to be growing it there. So I don't know if anything will happen or what, but the law specifically said you couldn't grow it, trees for CBD.
Yeah.
Interesting.
In the European subsidy law, the crop has to be seeded.
Wow, so no female seeds in Europe or you won't get subsidized.
And the hemp growers in Europe make more money from the subsidy than they do selling their products.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of innovation too. I mean, California has been kind of carving out the rules as it goes for a long time. So I think people are going to have to try to do what is allowed, and then they're going to have to figure out how to do what works, because that's really going to be the face of things.
And keep in mind, there's a 5-year window on all that regulation. After year 5, after the licenses are given out, the canopy cap is lifted and it's a free-for-all. There's going to be, as me and Dave, as we said multiple times, it's going to go to the big ag, and they're going to produce the distillates and Budweiser of cannabis, if we will.
I'm not in the law. I think cheap cannabis for all would be great.
In the law, it said pruning and tending of individual industrial hemp plants is prohibited, except when grown by an established agricultural research.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, it's pretty clear they wanted to take the most valuable part of hemp away from the hemp farmers, give it to the marijuana farmers.
Well, if you just want hemp fiber, what you really want is an all-male variety, which would really drive your neighbors nuts.
Oh, boy.
That's actually pretty funny. But hey, hemp deserves to grow too. I mean, the environment needs it. I think it would be a good thing,
The reason that it took until Proposition 64 to legalize hemp in California was downwind medical grows. That's why Jay Leno, or Assemblyman Leno in San Francisco, wrote it so that no hemp would be grown until this year.
Really?
Yeah, that's why you never saw hemp grown, like, say, 4 years ago or 3 years ago in California, is the hemp law was so restrictive, and it basically had all these restrictions, and at the end said nothing happens till the feds legalize. So, it was a hemp bill. It was done for the HIA as a hemp bill, and but it resulted in no hemp ever be grown legally in California.
If they grow all female clones, it does not cause problems.
Correct. Yeah, well, that was way advanced at the time, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Well, things are changing rapidly. I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago that we would be sitting here in legalization, talking about hemp cultivation on a large scale? I mean, and not that I want to sit here and reminisce, but it's actually 20 years ago today that I was raided by the feds, and with 4,116 plants in my home, and started a journey.
How many of them were male and how many of them were female?
A very small percentage, maybe 2% of those 4,116 plants were boys. I had a special little place for them.
Yeah,
But the majority of them were girls. And what I was really doing at the time was sorting through as many different varieties as I could. My goal was to try to put together is from the shortest flowering plants I could find to the longest flowering plants I could find, and everything in between. It's really my goal.
and a very beautiful plant from 1976.
Yes, I was given a very beautiful cutting of something called Skunk #1 that was supposedly a seed cracked in 1976 that had been kept through clone at the time for 21 years. And it was pretty fantastic, actually. That old
Skunk was only about 16, 17% THC at the most. But what it had was buku terpenes of the right kind that potentiated and modulated and made it as great as other cannabis that was much higher in THC.
Mm-hmm. That plant that I had was not as acrid as what I think people call roadkill skunk, but it was not sweet like what I found in Amsterdam. It was definitely more in between.
Did it have a lot of terps?
Yeah, it was stinky as hell, but it wasn't. It didn't have that almost ammonia stinky smell. But it didn't have a super sweet smell either.
Yeah,
It was.
what I'm really talking about is the fact that it produces a lot of resin with a lot of terps, and it has that effect where you can smell it right through a Ziploc, for example, or something like that.
Yeah, it was super. It was super stinky. I actually had an old friend over that is a Hollywood producer, and he was smoking something with me, and he sat there and he said, "What happened to the varieties from when I was in college back in the mid 70s? It made me feel up and give me energy and made me feel great." So I went and I grabbed this jar of Skunk 76, and I was like, "Well, here you go." And he was a wine connoisseur, and he was trying to like get his head around it. He's like, "Was this made in 76? What do you mean 76?" So I had to explain to him that the cutting has been kept alive since 1976 and grown the whole time. And then he was just amazed because from a wine perspective, they don't really get to do that to the same degree because their environmental conditions year to year are going to determine how well their grapes turn out, their wine is. I mean, the whole thing is environmental because it's all an outdoor situation. So he was blown away. And when he smoked the skunk, he said it was like, seeing an old girlfriend. He just, brought him right back. So I think a lot of these heirloom strains are going to be what people are looking more towards, because when I was sitting there looking through the Phylos Galaxy last night, and it's amazing how closely related most of the stuff on this market is. I mean, and I couldn't find haze, and I wanted to ask you about that, Sam. On the Phylos Galaxy, I didn't see any real haze categorized.
I contributed some. Look at all the ones that I contributed, and you'll probably find it.
Technically, I did. I didn't know I could do a name search, so I was pretty excited when I found out I could. And I was sitting there clicking on everything, to be really honest with you. What really impressed me was how many of the countries of origins are listed, and that really blew me away because, I mean, this is where it all came from, isn't it? I mean, guys, like you going around and collecting these varieties and then bringing them home and turning them into.
Ganja was collected, for example, in Mexico, in Colombia, and Jamaica, and it came there via. It either probably from Africa, but maybe even from India or Thailand or places like that. So, but you know, a lot of that happened 400 or 500 years ago, and so there was hundreds of years for there to be a Colombian variety, a whole handful of Mexican varieties, and Jamaican varieties. They were basically settled down into land races that were stable until they were bombarded with Western genetics, and now they're multi-polyhybrid like every place else in the world almost.
When they got bombarded with Western hybrids, do you feel that happened in the 70s?
It started in the 70s, yes, both in Mexico and Jamaica, and soon afterwards in Morocco. And it was a combination of Westerners trying to do good, help them, but not thinking. And also, I'm sure local Moroccans, if they were up in Amsterdam and saw the seed companies, I wouldn't be surprised if they bought a handful of seeds. And if we were lucky, they were all female seeds. And so that caused a 1-year delay before the damage was caused, because if you grow any female plant in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains, it will be pollinated by every male within 10 miles, or they'll try. And the end effect of it is that even if you take all female seeds there, they will be pollinated. Those seeds will be passed out. Those will have male and female seeds. And so the pollen starts from there. Or if you import seeds from Afghanistan and you grow them in Morocco, then the males the first year will start pollinating. And it's just like a ripple effect. It soon has reached everywhere in the Atlas Mountains, because there is no area where you can grow there that doesn't get pollinated. It all does.
Can I ask you, you said something about 10 miles. Can male pollen travel 10 miles?
Yes, in the right weather. If it's dry and a little bit windy, I'm sure it can do 10 miles. I think it can even do further, but it has to go pretty high up to do that. And then it sometimes it'll freeze, and when it thaws out, it kills it. So whether or not it's actually viable at longer distances, there's not so much proof. But 10 years, 10 miles, that downwind, easy.
Yeah, that's what.
In Spain, they used to have pollen alerts for the population.
There you go.
Yeah,
From Morocco.
And that was all from cannabis pollen in Morocco blowing north.
Absolutely true, Richard,
Yep.
but they didn't ever show that the pollen was viable. That it showed the pollen reached Spain, that's all.
Correct. That's what I was going to point out, the difference between travel and viability. They used to actually, as Richard was pointing out, actually measure the amount of pollen in the stratosphere and calculate the amount of cannabis that Morocco was producing at the time. Kind of a funny quote.
It would actually show up on USA Today. I remember I used to have a clipping of USA Today, and it would have the pot leaves going from Morocco up into Spain.
Yeah, pretty incredible.
Wow. Have they done any pollen studies in California? I ask because I remember years ago, Jack Harrow was basically telling me that a lot of the pollen in California was cannabis pollen from the growers. And I thought that's kind of weird, because why would the growers?
Almost all growers kill their males.
That's what I thought. Yeah, Jack was a little enthusiastic about anything with cannabis. So I always had to stop and think for a minute, who would be growing males, Jack? And he'd be like, oh, shut up, but
the Colorado Department of Ag, the head did the same thing. He said that, the problem goes both ways. Hemp doesn't just pollinate marijuana, but marijuana will pollinate our hemp seed and make it worthless.
Oh, it'll drive up those THC levels. So just to be straight, the only two forms of cannabis that are really legal in this state are really good cannabis and really bad cannabis. Nothing in between.
I'm not sure hemp is legal or just tolerated, because you can't import a registered European variety into America. Not so easy. They could for experimentally in Kentucky and maybe a few other places, but I think most of the people are using seed that's been produced in their local areas.
No, there's a lot of certified hemp seed coming in from Europe. All you need is a DEA 225 permit to bring that in.
And the DEA is giving people licenses to import hemp seed?
Of course.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware. As you know, I don't live in America.
Yeah, they've even though they keep getting sued when they try to legalize and do the right thing by the hemp people, they're still giving licenses, especially if you don't have long hair.
Especially, right? The Kentucky people in Kentucky are growing, I believe, over 1,000 acres this summer right now. Last year they had over 900 acres planted, and it's amazing what they're doing out there. It's good to see Kentucky but getting back into the hemp game, and they definitely don't have long hair. They look like a bunch of gray hairs.
Do you know what products they're going to be producing so that we can support them?
Yes,
Well,
they're going
they
to be.
told me they were going to focus on CBD because it was the biggest moneymaker.
Yes, sir. And hemp seed. They're doing hemp seed oil, and they're going to do dehulled hemp seed, and they're also now going to be doing CBD infused hemp seed oil, and that's going to be one of the products I believe we see probably before Christmas. I've already seen mock-up bottles. So. Are you guys seeing any CBD infused hemp seed oil in the market in Europe?
Well, you know,
I don't look for it, to be honest. You know, me and CBD, we don't really get along. We're not bros.
Right. Not a fan. How about in Italy, Richard? Is there much hemp seed food awareness? And if so, is there much CBD awareness with it?
yeah, there's nobody selling it per se that way, you know, with CBD as a marketing benefit or on the label or anything, but it could have still as much as 1,000 parts per million CBD. That's not a good source for it. Most of the CBD extracts, I think, are like you see in Colorado, just oils.
In the health foods here in Amsterdam, they sell CBD. I think it's capsules of oil, but to be honest, I didn't look really closely at them. I just saw them for sale in the health food stores.
That's fantastic. I mean, that they in Amsterdam they shut down a coffee shop that was trying to supply CBD only varieties to people. It was over in the red light district, and they shut that right down. So it's kind of nice to see that they're allowing health food stores to sell CBD. I mean,
the big thing that's happening in Southern Europe is tobacco type products, not pot type products, hemp, CBD, hemp buds for smoking. And there's about maybe 5 manufacturers in Italy, 5 brands, and at least 3 in Switzerland that I know of.
Wow. Well, it's picking up. You know, as we share information, more people are getting tuned in and wanting to try it, is the way I see it happening.
As I said, in Alaska, CBD is available in the health food stores. So, I mean, they're selling it there currently, even though it is still quasi, illegal for them to sell it in the dispensaries, even for adult use. It's still interesting that, you can then go across town just to a health food store and get your CBD. It's changed a lot.
Colorado just changed their law in the last 6 months or so. Previously, you could not sell CBD products unless it was from a metric or a med-regulated supplier into the dispensary. So if you wanted to sell CBD, you had to actually add THC to get legal to sell in a dispensary.
Wow, who would have expected that?
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I've been hoping for years.
Do you use CBD much, Kenny?
I find it fascinating in the potential of it, but as far as consuming it myself, not really.
No, me too.
I marvel at it and its potential to help other people. But
if it helps people, that's why we developed the first CBD variety, because we wanted to have the materials available for research and development, so scientists and doctors could look into it. Plus, I fundamentally hope that CBD could help people, and anybody it does, I encourage them. If it helps you, that's the bottom line.
absolutely.
I've been using it. On the trip while I was traveling. I used the gold drop pills. I would use 35 millimeter and for the THC, and then I would take the 10 CBD, and that for me really was fine. I sometimes have anxieties, and I have to say the CBD really helps with my anxieties. So I've been using it consistently, and at night when I want to go to bed, or because I just can get so uppity, I will smoke the pure CBD distillate, and it just puts me right in that just about mood to fall asleep, where I can just go to sleep. So I don't use it throughout the day regularly, but when I was traveling, I found that it was beneficial, and I will continue to use it for my anxiety. But I still, whenever I want to go to sleep or rest, I just take some of the straight, and for me, it puts me where I need to be to go to sleep. So for me, it works. So thank you, Sam, for those discoveries and making those realities, and others to manufacture and do what they do.
It's funny to me because when Rob and I tried pure CBD, we vaped each 100 milligrams of it, so 1/10 of a gram we vaped. He did, and I did. And we did that first thing in the morning, fresh in the morning when we hadn't smoked anything. And we both decided very quickly that it had no psychotropic effects. It didn't get you high. It may have effects like calming and all of these things. That really wasn't what we were looking for at that time. But what we did decide is after about an hour of that was enough. Okay, so then we tried smoking some of my dry sipped resin that was like 60% THC by dry weight, and we couldn't get high over the next 8 to 10 hours. I mean, finally we just gave up and went to sleep, and both of us had really bright, loud, vivid dreams. I mean, usually if you smoke every day, you seldom remember your dreams. You dream, but you don't remember them. And that night, both of us, we had bright, vivid, really shook up dreams. And we remember them really clearly. The next morning, if we smoked something, we got high fine. But for 12 hours, 100 milligrams blocked it completely.
And do you, when you say blocked, do you think that CBD blocks the CB1 and CB2 receptor so that the cannabis or the THC?
I don't understand the mechanisms exactly.
Me neither.
I know if you smoke 100 milligrams of THC CBD, so 100 milligrams of THC simultaneously with 100 milligrams of THC, if you have them mixed, you absolutely do get high. Most Afghan hash is half CBD, half THC. I mean, and absolutely you get high, you get stoned. It's a bit different than if you smoke hand-rubbed resin that is from ganja varieties that have been developed by farmers that smoked each individual plant, and they weeded away all the CBD and ended up with pretty much pure THC varieties of varying amounts. And so it's fundamentally different. Afghan hash and hand-rubbed, like Himalayan type hash that often has little or no CBD in it. And but I think sifted, you can make cleaner and stronger hash than you can with hand rub. Hand rub is, it's a dirty process.
Yeah. I canceled spinal surgery because of taking CBD orally, 200 milligrams one time. Literally, I was having a crushing pain in my arm, and I canceled the surgery because of it.
Wow, was that beneficial?
Yeah, one time, 200 milligrams. I had this pain for like a month. And it started, ironically, when I was giving CBD dabs out at the High Times Cannabis Cup, a booth the Medicinal Hemp Association had there. And so a lot of people had their first CBD dab there. But it started then, and then about a month later, it was so bad I was looking at surgery, and I took one 200 milligrams one time, and bam, it was gone.
So what you're really saying, Richard, is that the CBD first caused your pain and then cured it.
Such is life, and as in life, I think that 100% of the human and pet population can benefit from CBD. It's such a powerful anti-inflammatory and apoptic.
We are seeing it being very popular, actually. Dog treats with CBD. In fact, I have a couple of people in my office that give their dogs CBD treats, and because they're older dogs and they are getting benefits from it. They seem to be more active, easier for them to move around, get through their day, etc. And they have a little more pep in their steps, and the dogs react well to it and like it.
Yeah, the most recent medical marijuana bill is the one in Wisconsin, and that one actually mandates a THC to CBD ratio no greater than 3-1.
Well, our friend Dan, who founded the Secret Cup, just posted a video on Facebook the other day, and it was of a dog who was having seizures. The poor dog was visibly shaking, and the owner used the tincture spray of CBD and sprayed it into the dog's mouth, and within 30 seconds, you could physically see the dog stop the way the dog was shaking and reacting to its seizure. And it was amazing. I mean,
are you sure the dog wasn't addicted to CBD and he was just getting his fix and that made him quit shaking?
Totally strung out, obviously. It was clear that it had a long time supplier. No, but you know, I think it's powerful. I had a girlfriend when I was in my teens who had seizures, and when she was with me, we would smoke weed constantly, and we never ran out of weed, and I always gave her weed when we're leaving each other at night. So she always had pot, and she never had a seizure when we were together. And then when I moved away, we were still in touch because we were still friendly, and she told me, you know, I started getting seizures after you left again. And I you know, thought to myself, you need more cannabis. I told her that out loud. You know, unfortunately, she was not, you know, that well off, so she wasn't able to go out and buy the kind of pot she had when we were together, which was just constant weed. She could never run out of weed. But you know, I thought so many people like her probably would benefit if they could just have a never-ending, uninterrupted supply of flowers. I wish everyone could, to be honest. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I really take offense when people are talking, you know, smack about big cannabis coming in and cannabis prices dropping, because I keep thinking, isn't that the best thing that could happen for society? I mean, we've had $2 Chuck wine on the shelves for half a decade, I mean, half a century, and look at the problems it's caused. I mean, when we have really cheap, accessible, low or mid-quality cannabis that people could consume all they want of, I just think it's going to make society a healthier, happier place. I sincerely do.
And I believe it's healthier to consume than imported.
Imported what?
Imported from south of the border cannabis that a large percentage of middle America consumes now.
Wow, why do you say that?
Has anybody ever tested the stuff coming from south of the border? I'd much rather them consume a Budweiser of vape pen cartridges than imported marijuana.
When you put it that way, you're absolutely right. Because who's regulating the grows down south? Nobody.
Yeah, when people talk bad about that Budweiser of cannabis, the mid-grade stuff, I'm just looking at the poor people in middle America that are still smoking imported cannabis. I mean, it's like, well, how much is imported into the United States? I mean, literally, I mean, within the past 3 years, I've seen 2 16-foot aluminum boats touch down south of San Francisco, 30 miles south of San Francisco, with 3 motors on the back loaded with imported marijuana. And I ask myself, you couldn't give that away in California. That means that stuff's going, and this is just the 2 that have been caught. How many have landed since or before or whatever, you know, and they're loaded. You know, first of all, my mind goes, oh my God, what would put you in a 3-motored boat going from Mexico to Northern California? What a horrific trip that must have been. And where is that stuff destined? And I'm sure it goes to a stash house. Once it's accumulated, you got a truckload, then you send it to the East Coast or Middle America. Yeah. You know, still the powers that be in south of the border, still 70%, I believe, of their income comes from marijuana sales in the United States. And as the states, their equivalent of a RAND report was done, I believe, 2 years ago, and the so-called powers that be they were able to calculate the math on how much money that they were going to lose once the United States goes legal. Yeah, and it's in the fucking billions of dollars. So as a replacement for that imported, until they get, let's call it, educated or super educated, and don't want to drink Budweiser anymore. They want a craft brew or this, that, the other thing. Bless them to be able to have.
Mexico's headed in the same direction. Medical's legal in Mexico now too. So I mean, it's going to change, and it's going to become a tax and regulated business. And I say it's safer for the consumers, and it will be cheaper in the long run.
Yeah, you could end up getting your stuff from south of the border again because it's just cultivated properly, highly regulated, and
you can buy wine and distilled spirits and beers from any country in the world.
Sure.
There's no logical reason why you shouldn't be able to do that with cannabis products in the future.
Correct.
That's right.
The feds have to get out of the way, of course.
Well, we have to deal with the 1961, convention treaty as well.
It's the 71 that's the real killer, the UN single drug convention.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's going to be corporate entities that challenge and change those laws.
Yeah.
Because once they realize they've got to have a production and manufacturing and distribution network.
Already groups in the UN are agitating for taxing and regulating drugs rather than making them illegal because it doesn't work to make them illegal anyway.
We had somebody in the chat that said, wait till China jumps in. Made in China on the bottom of your pot package is coming soon, I'm sure.
And to the other comment, I heard we're 2 steps away from bailing out of the UN anyway, huh?
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Well, also UN has to do is make a special award to Trump for all of his knowledge, wisdom, and negotiating ability, and then he'll support it tooth and nail.
Didn't even want to go there, man. I was just pointing out the obvious. That we're damn near out of the UN. We're about to Brexit.
We are about to indeed. Or just break one of the two. I'm not really positive.
But our interference has caused the change that we're seeing that has spawned from South America and these countries that are now pushing up against the US drug laws. So
it's resistance. It's great. I mean, to see South American countries just go and throw their hands up and go, okay, you got these little pockets in America that you're doing what you want, but you're still holding us to our feet to the fire, so to speak, with federal aid and funding and stuff. Look, we're not going to take it anymore, and we're going to do what we got to do and what's best for our people. That's absolutely incredible. Fantastic.
Yeah, but what you bring up still kind of haunts me. The idea of, we're over here looking at so many crops coming into steep hill that are failing for pesticide use and such. It only makes me wonder how rampant the use of things like Avid and Eagle 20 and pesticides you don't want to smoke is on the south of the border Canada.
I've read reports when they busted the really big giant growers down there, and that there was that one farm that was, I think, 3 square kilometers or something crazy like that. They were using 20,000 slave labor people.
It
was a fairly large one, and when they busted it, they found all kinds of banned pesticides. Correct?
Yeah, I believe that was Rafael Quintero's garden.
Yeah, I believe that's correct, because they went after the DEA Kiki Ramirez, or whatever his name was, and who got killed because of him doing this to Quintero.
Supposedly Kiki flew over it on his way to a Contra training base that was in Mexico, and he looked down at it and said, I'm going to get that. And he ended up getting it, but then Quintero got him too. So
it was covered with black shade cloth. You couldn't see it was cannabis, but it was pretty obvious what the fuck it was.
Yeah. Horrible story on both sides. Just absolutely fucking horrible.
I can't wait till the cannabis war is over, because it has destroyed so many lives in the name of nothing. It hasn't accomplished anything other than to make, the American government
taxed and regulated. All the workers could be union workers. Let the union mafia rip them off, like, everything else.
Speaking of mafia, how about back in the day whenever Carlton Turner developed paraquat, sold it to Mexico, gave them the planes and helicopters to spray it on the crop, and then Turner goes and puts an ad in High Times magazine saying that he'll test your pot for paraquat. That's fucking hilarious, huh?
Really?
It's the same government approving pesticides.
Huh?
It's the same government approving pesticides today in regulated grows.
Yeah.
It's the state.
For those listening, Carlton Turner at the time in the 70s was the person that was running the Mississippi Marijuana Project. He preceded Muhammad Asoli in heading the program, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. He left the University of Mississippi.
I heard recently that Carlton Turner's somehow connected with pro-cannabis something. Maybe I'm crazy.
Say again?
I had heard or read somewhere that Carlton Turner was somehow connected with the pro-cannabis organization in some way. But
Wow.
maybe I'm just had a dream.
Yeah, that'll be a turn of events, because last I had contacted him or tried to contact him, he wanted nothing to do with this, was working still university-based and I believe consulting for corporations, but not in the cannabis space at all.
Really? Well, I thought he went into the private urine testing industry afterwards, because
yeah, but
certainly helped set that up.
Yeah, but after that, he's getting his residuals from that. Every probation officer's testing people like you and me, and
yeah, he must be very addicted by now, I would think.
Who knows? Not my arena, but certainly interesting behavior back in the day to go and create a chemical, sell it to a foreign country, and then try to sell a test kit to detect for it.
Yeah, as you're poisoning the people that you're advertising to in high times, because that's really what they were doing.
I think Paraquat was actually owned by Dow, or one of the big companies. It wasn't owned by Carlton Turner. He just arranged for all of these treaties so that they would get this equipment and sprays, and if they would go after the dangerous narcotic marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is why I think that the United States, more than anyone, is hugely responsible for cleaning up the mess they created with prohibition. That, to me, is something that we are all burdened with the responsibility of, because it was our forefathers that took this stupid prohibition and went to every single country that America did business with and insisted that they had marijuana eradication programs set up and enforced this friggin' ignorance that we've all been fighting for decades.
Actually started with the League of Nations even earlier, and South Africa and Egypt were really strongly behind it, with America and the UK.
In California, it started even before the Marijuana Tax Act, when a drug dealer from Nevada went to the right guy in the state of California and said, it's illegal in Nevada and we're making tons of money, but we're not making it here. Pass a law and make this shit illegal. And so he did. And that's how we got the first marijuana law in California, which I think was 1913.
Wow. Yeah. It's been a while. I mean, we've had a lot of resistance to this plant for a long time. Fortunately, I think the internet's changing that, because I think as more people get tuned into the truth and the history of it, its place in society is undeniable.
And if that doesn't work, then Todd will give him a marijuana brownie.
I will. Actually, I'll make brownies for the whole neighborhood. What was funny is, after I got busted 20 years ago, Jay Leno was goofing on me a few times. And when I got out of prison, he was made a joke that after I got out of prison, just to make sure with all my neighbors that there wasn't any hard feelings, that I made brownies for the whole neighborhood. But it would be nice, brownies for everyone. But hey, I think that edibles are actually really cool in the sense that it turns a lot of people into heads without the smoke. I mean, if you look at events like Burning Man and, every concert known to man, other than that, the potheads always get caught first, because we have this big plume of smoke around us, while the people doing the not so obvious drugs can, walk away and not get noticed. So it's been kind of hard on us, I think, as stoners for a long time.
We've always been low-hanging fruit, as they say.
Really easy to catch us, right?
Easy to catch, obvious. Don't put up much of a resistance, and
I've never put up a resistance if they harass me. I'm super polite. I've never had my ass kicked. I've never been maced. I've never been beat by a cop. Never. They've always been nice to me. So I'm always polite.
I had a policeman pull his gun out, aim it at my forehead, and say, "It'd be easy to say you were trying to escape," because I had cut up an American flag and was wearing them as a pair of pants.
Wow.
Wow, I love that. That's
Wow.
that's pretty cool. American flag fans.
Commie,
I
Commie.
only made it about 3 blocks.
Pinko.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. You know, Larry Flint wore an American flag as a diaper to court once and proceeded to throw an orange at Judge Rial. So it's not a bad way to wear the flag, I think.
As a 13-year-old, I got a hold of Dana Peel's Have a Marijuana record and heard his songs one after another, and just his activism, his anger, everything resonated with me. It was like, wow, this is fucking incredible.
David Peel was cool. I got to go hang out with him in New York 20 years ago with Jack Herrer. Jack and I were roaming around New York City before we went to a Cannabis Cup, and we saw David at some store, and he was like, Jack, you know, he brought us up to his artist little thing and got high all night. It was really cool. He's a very passionate guy, you know, rest in peace now. He was really one of the voices of reason that I always appreciated. He was a little loud and a little obnoxious, but I always thought it was in the right places.
Tip of the spear.
Yeah.
To go and have John Lennon put that record out for him and produce that record and everything else, or engineer it, whatever the affiliation was an incredible collaboration. And his song Have a Marijuana was really incredible to me.
It was cool. We need more John Lennons. I mean, it's amazing how much of the music industry does not support legalization like you'd think they would. You know, all these hypocrites getting high in their green rooms, you know, and the backstages before concerts. And, you know, almost none of them stepped up to help legalize cannabis with 64 or any of the other efforts we've been doing.
Yeah, and they won't support congressmen, senators that are so-called positive now either.
Right. It's really
Yeah,
crazy.
it's kind of very, very bizarre.
Yeah, you know, 20 plus years ago, the Grateful Dead were speaking out against deforestation, and somebody asked, you know, what are you rock and rollers doing talking about this? And Jerry Garcia was like, I don't know. Why do we even have to? Why do you got to listen to rock and rollers, you know, talk about deforesting when you should be talking about it yourselves? It should be part of the conversation journalists are bringing to us, and you're not. So I think it's kind of the same thing. I mean, it's really not the responsibility of artists. I don't put the burden on them, but I really wish they would participate in the culture in which they celebrate so much, so to speak. But just like John Lennon did with John Sinclair and Dana Beale. I mean, Peel, these were people that directly were benefiting from the generosity and compassion and empathy of huge rock stars. I don't think you get bigger than John Lennon when it comes to, you know, music achievement.
But marijuana issue aside, I mean, realistically, look, Willie Nelson and a whole bunch of other artists have been putting on something called Farm Aid for almost 30 fucking years now. You're telling me that an artist has to throw a concert to help support the family farm who's producing food that everybody produces? Don't even get into the cannabis issue. Fuck, everybody needs food, right?
No,
but Farm Aid itself did support hemp and was actually one of the earlier proponents.
My God, we still. Yeah, I agree with you, but we still have an entity 30 years later trying to help feed and support the family farm in America. Is absolutely fucking ludicrous.
Right, Farm Aid shouldn't have to
exist.
No,
it shouldn't have to exist.
Totally agree. And you know what? If it wasn't for Willie Nelson, Dave Matthews, and John Cougar, those guys, and Neil Young, the farmers wouldn't even know about hemp to the degree that they do now, because Willie has been a huge lightning rod of awareness for everyone around him. I swear he's going around getting the whole world high, you know, one person at a time. He's doing a great job of it. But if it wasn't for the efforts of people like Willie Nelson, other than, you know, when I say this, I guess obviously there are Willie Nelsons that have been. I think Willie's an activist as much as any activist I've ever met. I mean, he's never given up his message. He's always stayed true to his tone. I think the guy's a hero to many people. I don't like country music that much, but I absolutely love Willie Nelson.
Much more so putting it on the line than someone who says for shizzle calls their record The Chronic or whatever it be. I mean, the man has a record called Roll Me Up and Smoke Me When I Die. Fuck, that's commitment, right? You know, and makes no bones about it. And he's a very, very good ambassador for cannabis use. He admits to consuming it every day. It doesn't interfere with what he does. People all over the world love and respect him and accept the basic fact that he consumes cannabis, which is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think people like him have normalized the face of cannabis in a big way.
Big time, big time.
Yeah. How are you going to say that, potheads are not successful, thoughtful, considerate people when there are so many that are?
Yeah, and not only just Willie, but his whole family, everybody he has around him, his whole entourage, if you will, for lack of, let's call it a family, not an entourage. His whole family, it really, really spreads such a warm message. It's incredible. His sister, his manager, everybody else, really incredible people.
Yeah, I love it. I've gotten to sit on the side of the stage and watch him play with that family multiple times. I love Willie. He's great.
And he's fostered that environment for decades, and that's what's so beautiful. It's been natural and organic, and he's, as you said, he stayed true to himself. And by doing so, look at the youth that have come out, and he has also embraced the youth of different music genres. Look, he's made songs with Snoop Dogg. He just made a song with Toby Keith. I mean, these are mega stars in their own rights that are seeking out Willie to do these types of things and have that cannabis because of his long standing record with cannabis. They want to accolade him, and so I see them as them holding him up, and he's embracing it as well, because he deserves the accolades for the information and staying true to himself through I mean, Jesus Christ, from just look at what happened from his whole tax evasion situation.
Well, I was going to say, he got his ass kicked by the government and smoked a joint on top of the White House. All right then.
Right. And so everybody saw that. And so he even he put out an album saying, go buy my stuff. And people bought his stuff and gave it back to him. I mean, he has created just a natural organic love around him, and he's naturally embraced cannabis. And so, yeah, it's been fascinating to watch, but it's also interesting to see these different genres embrace him for the icon of cannabis that he is. But to also see him embrace it right back and just be Willie, be himself as normal. So
yeah, well, but it is him being himself. But it's a shame he's had to kind of single-handedly carry the torch for 30 years. You know what I mean? Where a lot of the other guys that are, like I said, putting out records called The Chronic when they don't really even consume that much.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean?
How many were as successful as, remember, Willie goes back to the 60s. So, I mean, his success goes back. So, I mean, he said, I don't give a fuck. Okay, but how many of those other musicians could afford to give a fuck?
His biggest fans are actually bookkeepers, like the ones that stole the millions of dollars from him. They got him in the tax problem.
I'm not sure about that, but you might be right. When you're at that level of touring and writing songs and playing music, I don't know how the fuck you find time to sit there and worry about all the little crossed T's and dotted I's, so I'm sure a lot of it falls through the cracks. And then, upon reflection, they go, oh shit.
He must have had money stolen or mismanaged his tax filings. That's the reason why they came after him. And seized his property and all kinds of crap.
Yeah, I mean, he's a phenomenal guy. I mean, but even one of his best friends, Woody, Woody had to make a conscious decision 25 years ago when he became seen as an activist, when he started doing interviews and talking about the environment, and then when he started speaking out against hemp. He lost jobs, he lost sponsorships. He was asked to be the grand poopah or whatever it is at the New Orleans parade one year, and after people that were organizing the festivities in New Orleans saw him doing an interview with, I believe it was Ron Kovac, about the first Gulf War, they called him up and said, we think you're lower than whale shit. We don't want to associate with you at all. So I think that it is hard on a lot of these people because it costs them. You get ostracized once you out yourself and you become a joke unwittingly by Jay Leno and Jimmy whatever and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? So and you see it all the time, and it's like, I mean, they make fun of them when they're not on the show, but then they're friends with them when they're on the show, kind of sort of thing. So they double standard, and it's like, everybody has respect for him because, I mean, you can talk shit all you want, but the guy had a great television career. He moved into a great film career, and he's really stayed on top of his game for quite a long time. He's still busy as shit.
Yeah, but the kid that did the Harold and Kumar, the kid that also worked for the Obama administration. When he goes on a talk show, the first thing they want to reference is like, oh, stoner humor and Harold and Kumar, and he's like, actually, I don't even consume this, that, the other thing. So someone who doesn't even consume, just simply played a role, a very famous role, still gets put in that box. So it's kind of a fascinating hypocrisy.
Yeah, well, he profited from cannabis humor, so I have no sympathy for him.
No. I'm just pointing out the obvious. You know what I mean? That, you know, why wouldn't someone, you know, I mean, people like Susan Sarandon do out herself and stuff, but, you know, why don't more prominent individuals with more responsibilities point out that they do consume multiple times a day, and better yet, support their politicians and people that are actually making these rules and regulations. You know, they can step up too. You know, I mean,
I understand. You know, I got the great pleasure of meeting a hero of mine. It was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he and I actually, it's known, or it was known, that he used cannabis to help him with migraines. And he says, you know, we sat for a while talking, we ate dinner together, and I was asking him some questions, and I asked him, did you ever smoke cannabis when you played basketball? And it was funny because we were eating, he said, did you ever see me play basketball? I said, of course. He goes, then you saw me play high. He goes, because I smoked every time before a game, because I had to make sure I didn't get any headaches during the game, because, you know, those were my office hours. That's when I was working. And it blew me away that at the time, it's like the NBA's all-time scoring, you know, champion or whatever it was. We had this conversation in the 90s, was stoned every single time he played.
Yeah, but some commission would call that a negative and put an asterisk behind his name, career, right, and say he had a performance-enhancing drug in his system. However, fuck that is.
That's right. You know, and I asked him why he wouldn't come out and support what we were doing, and he actually was really sweet about it. And he says, you know, I do a lot of work with kids, and he goes, I would just get, you know, a lot of what I do that I'm passionate about would be taken away from me. He goes, you know, and I really appreciate what you're doing, but, you know, I'm still scared. I mean, he actually lived down the street from me on Stone Canyon, and when I was sitting there talking to him, and he recognized me, and he started telling me his own story about me getting busted and him watching the cops go by, and, you know, he told me he actually cried, you know, like, because when he turned on the news and realized what they were up the street doing to me, it made him feel like shit, you know. And we shared the same doctor, so we had a bunch of things in common. It was actually Jack Herr that helped him get his medical prescription 21 years ago now. And I think it sucks, because more people like him, if they could come out and they could be honest with more people and have that conversation publicly like he had with me privately, I think so many people would be impacted to realize that people they've looked up to for so long have also been making the same decisions they've been making to use cannabis instead of, you know, drinking or whatever it is they do.
It's the last thing that will be gone, Todd, and that is the cultural cannabis stigma that a certain percentage of the population holds against both cannabis and its use and the users. And the laws can be changed, but people still have a negative opinion of some people connected with this. And that's the way it is, because it's funny with alcohol, it's just so different. And it's obviously a bigger social problem than cannabis, but whatever. That's the way the country is we live in, folks.
But, you know, that's changing, because now there was just California's new law is going to allow country fairs to have cannabis as part of it. So I think what you're going to see is a normalization into society, just like we accept beer festivals and public drinking at public events. We're going to see public consumption of cannabis as society understands. I think, look, when you take into consideration how much we've changed in the last 20 years, think of how much this conversation is going to change in the next 20 years, because it is like a snowball. It's getting bigger, it's getting faster, and it's not stopping as it goes down this hill.
Any police authority will tell you that a crowd of people at an event where they're primarily drinking will have fights. At a cannabis event, that's not true. I mean, it really does create a different headspace for the crowd.
Yeah, look at alcohol at events now. They're actually corralled in their own little areas. They don't even want them to interact with others now because they know how violent they get. So
Keep them in a cage.
Insurance is making them put them in cages, literally.
Put them in a cage.
Right, fenced off areas like at Sonoma County Fairgrounds.
Just last Wednesday, I was at the
charge the other people a ticket to come and view the alcoholics.
Then it's a cage fight, right?
Come and watch the humans get drunk. That's great.
I was actually at the California State Fair last week and made a point to go to the exhibits where they got the jellies and jams and pies and garbage and stuff because, as Todd said, I had heard that they were going to include cannabis. And, I've gone the past couple of years and I go around, look at the agriculture and look at the, farm animals and look at all of it. I really enjoy the experience. Don't really do the rides and they'll fall apart and not really into who's operating them. But anyway, I go look at the other sites and I can't wait. I went into one area and there was like 300 jars and it was all jams and jellies and stuff. And I just looked at I can't wait to see, even as fast as next year, not like someday we're going to have marijuana in here. It's like, no, next year we're going to have marijuana in here. All of it from throughout the whole state of California. They got little booths that represent the counties. There's Modoc County, there's Humboldt County, Mendocino County. And for years I've walked by all right, props, but how come there's no pop in that, this, that, and the other thing? But now it's going to, within 365 days, I go back to the fair next where it's going to be pot everywhere. I mean, even out front of the gate, there was a man making pins, custom making pins, and his little thing said legalize it. And I was just like, dude, you got you're late. I don't know how well that's going to work out for you.
At the Sonoma County Fairgrounds?
No, that was Sacramento.
State
Fair.
County has a huge hall of flowers in its own, and I can't imagine in a few years maybe we'll have a really interesting hall of flowers.
Oh, I'll bet. I was at
the Alameda County Fair.
Flowers after the event is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I was at the Alameda County Fair and I went around looking, and the only cannabis thing was over in the photography. And there's a huge picture of this guy just kind of hugging this huge bud 3 times the size of his head. So the pictures are there, but only just recently in the last couple of weeks, they've come with that ruling that they'll allow it in the county fairs. So I look forward to next year because I would love to see, hey, here's my blue ribbon winning cannabis. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I placed first in, for my county or in the state of California. Just imagine your label then. I mean, it's one thing to have a High Times Cannabis Cup, but it'd be another thing when you actually have a state regulated fair competition that actually puts its actual ribbon on it. That's a whole other level.
What are you saying? You can't buy that cup, man?
I'm saying you can't buy that ribbon.
The first Cannabis Cup event that I attended was in the early 70s in Santa Rosa, and it was called a Harvest Festival. It was for 70, I don't remember the year, 3, 4, 5, and there was one every year. And then we told that to Steve Hager. He started the High Times one. And now, I mean, if you were to actually count the number of Cannabis Cup, Harvest Festival, whatever you want to call it, events, must be close to 1,000. I mean, it's in a year. It's for certain it's a few hundred.
Well, it leads my mind to go, who's going to judge all these competitions? And if you're a judge for the California State Fair on their cannabis committee, whatever, are you now a state employee?
I've actually judged every single one of them, and I'm getting tired of it.
Nah, I'll smoke your stash then.
Hey, listen, in 2014 at the Denver County Fair, I went to the pot pavilion they had upstairs.
Interesting.
And they didn't do it in 2015 because one of the dispensaries was handing out edibles to people and not telling them it wasn't. There's no THC in it.
I know
that's wrong.
That's wrong. No. What was supposedly a screw up? They thought that they were not medicated chocolates. They thought they were passing out the chocolates. And they accidentally passed out the medicated chocolates because they weren't labeled correctly.
So we were handing out Oxycontin and not Tic Tacs. That's fucked up. You know what I mean? who makes this mistake? Jesus Christ.
10 of the wrong people got baked.
Yeah, because they made a big stink of it, and I think they even sued the people that were passing out the tainted candies. We'll say.
What was the milligrams? Do you have any idea?
No, I'm not sure how potent it was, but in all honesty, I mean, and almost anything to somebody unsuspecting would feel like a lot.
Oh, those were 1,000-milligram candies,
They floated home.
1,000 milligrams from somebody unsuspecting would be yeah,
very disturbed, very disturbed,
beyond psychotropic.
Yeah, very disturbed. Someone explained to me it was an out-of-body experience, and I was like, wow, that's quite a description there.
Yeah, well, I've made them with 2 grams in each, but yeah, if I didn't have an out-of-body experience, then I was quite disappointed.
The biggest edible I ever ate personally was a 450 milligram, and I was high as I was really, 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 really high. I had no idea. I thought it was 50 milligrams of THC. I was totally wrong. Damn you!
Most of the ones I made would have a half a gram of THC, so that's 500 milligrams.
Too much for me, sir.
Activated?
Yes, activated.
500 milligrams would kick my ass. I mean, because 450 milligrams kicked my ass.
It was for Queen's Day. The purpose was kick your ass. I mean, everybody was clearly warned, these will kick your ass.
You're not going to remember the rest.
I saw one guy eat 3 of them.
No, was that the Queen, the band, or the lady?
No, in Holland they have a King's Day now. Now it's King's Day, right?
It was for my bicycle.
Hey man, let's get down into your Sinterklaas thing, man. I've still got a problem with that shit.
Oh no!
Am I?
No, that's what I know. No, I seen that, and I was like, someone showed that to me in Holland, and I was like, whoa. I was like, dude, they'll break your windows out in America for this, rightfully so. This is crazy shit.
Well, this one guy, a brother, dressed up as Sinterklaas, and you should have seen the reaction of the Dutchman.
Yeah.
It was just over the top.
Richard, I wanted to ask you, what are the flowers like in Italy?
It depends on who you know. A lot of it comes from Albania.
Wow.
Their version of brickweed. So there's some really, it's the food and oil culture. So, and cannabis has been grown here nonstop for 11,500 years. So there are some really good breeders and growers, and hemp is 0.6 instead of 0.2 with the rest of Europe. So it's a much more interesting environment. There's a renaissance in hemp food, a renaissance in vegan food, renaissance in hemp. They grow about at least 10,000 acres this year in the South.
Richard, have you been to the Bologna Hemp Museum?
No, but an Italian hit me to the fact that there's, I don't know, maybe as many as 9 hemp museums in Italy.
We've been to 3 of them. We reviewed them, but the Bologna one is my favorite. Go, if you get a chance, be sure to do so.
Yeah, I was going to go. Valeria was going to take me to it, and then there's also 2 traveling hemp museums that travel the country. So it's we've made hemp gelato here. There's a lot of hemp pasta. There's even Reggie's favorite cheese is a scaramuccia made near here that has hemp flowers and shelled seed in it.
Well, the Italians know how to make food. They're quite clever at it.
Yeah, it's my cooking, for instance, has improved dramatically being here because just the quality of ingredients and the general bar is raised. You know, the most average restaurant is better than anything you'd find in the States.
Well, got to come visit you, Richard. How much does cannabis cost? How much is high quality cannabis, per euro there in Italy these days?
I honestly don't know. I haven't bought any. Haven't bought any.
There's no legal outlets though. There's no coffee shops or medical cannabis clubs or anything like that.
No, well, there's not really. There's not like in Spain. You can buy Bedrocan from the state pharmacies, and all the Bedrocan products. I think they're about to legalize medical for home grows, and a lot of people think within 2 years it'll be recreational legal here. They're just trying to figure out how to deal with the mafia in it. The anti-mafia people and the police union have both come out for legalization flat out. So we'll see what happens. Your question earlier, hash is like 25 a gram here. Decent hash.
Oh. Well, there you have it. Yeah.
That's still pretty expensive then.
That is really expensive. Yeah. But it's probably pretty good hash though.
Well, there's a black market premium here.
Yeah. Right. Well, things are progressing. I mean, we're going to see more and more change happening. I think, especially as the economy is depressed in a lot of the European countries, like it is. You know.
Yeah, you know, in Albania, they had 1/3 of their GDP is literally tied up in cannabis, and they spend 1/6 of their GDP to eradicate it. So that's fully half of their GDP in Albania. They could go to much more productive usage, for instance. And that's an extreme example in Albania. But even in Italy, it's worth hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Yeah, I was just recently contacted by an essential oil manufacturer in Albania that actually lives in Holland and was inquiring about some of the processes that I do. And I found that kind of fascinating. And last week you had mentioned that GDP, that, you know, didn't realize they produce so much cannabis. Yeah,
and it's, you know, the police feel compelled to do something about it. And I met somebody who was there sitting down with everybody trying to resolve it to a more productive outcome.
Huh.
The families, the police.
Well, does Italy have a medical program, or do they have any medical exemptions?
They don't really have a medical program. You just go to the certain pharmacist, and he for certain kind of doctor, and he'll write a certain prescription that lets you go to a certain kind of pharmacy to get Bedrocan, Bed Indica. I think they have about 6 products. But they, you know, most of Italy is in apartments. It's not in single-family dwellings. So the whole grow issue is kind of more difficult to manage as a result.
Sure, huh?
Right.
Home grow.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually. Right. Although Holland seems to do really well growing in apartments. God knows I've done it in quite a few Amsterdam attics.
But it's still not legal growing in your apartment there.
No. Definitely, when I lived there, it's certainly what I was doing. What we were doing wasn't legal. It may have been tolerated to a large degree, but no, we still had friends get busted, and most of the time we got ratted out because the gardens would smell, and the neighbors would smell it. And you know, police would come. And the good thing about Holland is when they came in and found your room, they didn't arrest you. Usually they would just take all your stuff and then send you paperwork to come to court. And I had an American friend who ended up getting probation. He had a European passport, but he got busted growing, and he got busted 3 times, I think. And finally, the 3rd time, they actually made him come to court and gave him probation or whatever, because, you know, they were sick of coming and taking a shit. But no jail time or anything. Which is
now they can give you 2 years if they want to.
Wow.
In Holland, they're giving people 2 years for cultivating cannabis?
If they want to. The law exists, correct.
Do you remember Bernard Rapaz in Switzerland? He got 2 years growing for growing hemp that was 14% THC. It was for essential oil. But when they found the trichome tumbler in a barn, they arrested him, and he got 2 years for that.
Really? Because he's knocking the resin off of his legal plants?
Yeah, because 14% was legal because it was by end use, and his end use was essential oil. So he had acres and acres and acres of it outdoors. And it was all cool for a couple years, but then one time they stumbled on this like 6-foot long trichome tumbler. And it was like the jig was up, and they changed their law. It was no longer end use. It was 1% now.
Oh. Well, you know, things are definitely changing constantly, you know, and hopefully a lot of that. I was telling Kenny back, you know, 20 years ago when I was doing the magazine for High Life magazine, I inserted an article about a UK man who wrote a book called Trichomelia sensimilia, which basically meant 3 rooms growing. And he got 1 year in a UK jail for what they called incitement, saying that he was inciting other people to break the law because he wrote his book, which we're all very guilty of, obviously, inciting others. So I say incite more people. But how ridiculous is that, you know, they didn't charge him with growing, possession, nothing. They charged him with inciting.
I have a copy of his book.
Do you still?
Wow,
I
wow.
used to have a copy of that and unfortunately lost it over the years.
Absolutely, I have one. I have about 250 grow books.
Oh, I can't wait to visit you again.
And in that same vein, I was speaking with Todd yesterday about a magazine called Red Eye Magazine that was done by a man named Nick. And
yeah, I've got that also.
His alter ego is Zorro. So I'm going to try to get him on the show and get him to explain some of his adventures, because they're far and wide and pretty incredible. He was an incredible man who literally got on a plane. He went to see things, do things, and experience things that literally don't exist anymore. You know, and Nepal, for instance, most of the shrines and stuff that he's seen for his stories in his magazines after the earthquake don't even exist anymore. And so, you know, literally 10 tons worth of hash in a large room, and, you know, not stories from 20 years ago, but he would literally go get that story again and again. And hopefully he's listening to this, and I'd love to get him on the show to tell the stories personally.
Nick would be awesome. Red Eye Magazine was fantastic back in the day. I mean, he was doing it at the same time that they were locking up that gentleman for writing grow books.
Yeah,
so they could have done the same thing to Nick. I mean,
yeah,
it's insane.
He did 22 issues, or each one from start to beginning were all basically a one-man show, start to finish. Every bit of writing, advertising, everything, and each one of them is magnificent. And even today, I've got the very last issue, I believe number 22, and I won't read it, and I've had it for years, and I won't read it because once I read it, it's the last one I'll read, and I don't want it to be the last one I'll read, so I'll probably never ever read it.
Well, that's a nice way to have reverence. You know, if it wasn't for people like Nick and others, where the hell would the information be for cannabis?
They put their ass on the line. Like you said, coming from a little bitty town in England, he was producing this magazine and putting his life on the line, you know?
Yeah, the butane extraction.
Which put him, well, that's, exactly. He pre-printed the first published butane extraction article, and, you know, put himself under close scrutinization in that little town, because everybody under a microscope, because everybody knew who he was, what he did and things. And, you know, so, you know, the trouble that goes with that, the arrests that go with that for cultivation, etc. You know.
Do you remember what year Captain Butane, he did that?
2000.
2000. Yeah,
it
a
was
long time ago. Yeah. Thanks for helping move that along.
The article is called Captain Butane Saves the Day.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was the start of people starting to understand hydrocarbon extraction. Yeah.
For better, for worse.
For better or for worse. That's right. I mean, yeah. Hey, look, I still think BHO has done more good than harm. I think that it has helped more people.
Oh, yeah, completely agree.
And helped more lives get straight. And I feel bad for the few people that have tried to, you know, open blast butane in their parents' bathroom, or, you know, in a closed hotel or in their condo. But, you know, you can't fix stupid in some cases.
No, I was just more pointing out that the product produced in the early days might not have been the healthiest product to consume. So
no. For a long time, there was no, you know, pressure ovens, you know, vacuum ovens. There were no methods of purging, and you know, there was no YouTube with people sharing their
information,
experiences of how to do it. So a lot of
it was we got was buds that was coated in it. They didn't even know how to ingest it.
Trial by fire,
and no laboratory testing available. So
they had no idea. But thankfully, they stayed on it, because look at the industry we have now. And I mean, look at, I don't think there's a better cannabinoid product that's more medicinal than when you have a clean extraction of something like BHO, because CO2 is not good at pulling terpenes. Water is a polar solvent. It pulls everything you don't want. It pulls chlorophyll. It pulls mold. It pulls, you know, things that you just don't want in your hash. So this is why I think that the hydrocarbon extraction is superior than a lot of what we were using. And I know dry sieve, we all love dry sieve, but it's a long way until people can throw away, 99 grams out of a kilo and get one awesome gram. So practicality has to be taken into consideration as well. So at least I think so. When we have fields and fields and fields and piles of resin powder, the conversation will be very different.
I believe that'll be about 6 years from now.
And then Sam will be happy. All of the dry sieve he can smoke. Although that's been pretty much your theme for a long time.
Snooty old guy that cares about what variety dry sift resin that's 99.9% resin heads is this? What variety?
Somebody in the chat asked about alcohol extraction, and I've never been a big fan of it. I mean, it takes a bit of heat to cook off and to evaporate off the alcohol, and when you do that, it takes away a lot of the terpenes. So you really can't have heat and evaporation without a loss of the volatile terpenes, which I like. So I tend to not really appreciate or not really get into alcohol extractions for that purpose. Your thoughts?
You can evaporate the alcohol under a vacuum at pretty low temperatures.
Yeah,
I don't think that's happening, but yes, I think you're right. Absolutely, you can. I just don't think a lot of people are actually doing that.
I mean, for industrial recovery, I mean, obviously, you're trying to recapture your alcohol for reuse and stuff. I would much rather do an alcohol wash with, say, a Red Rabbit extractor or something like that with a regular technician than buy a $350,000 CO2 extractor with a high-skilled technician where either one is going to end up in alcohol. Either one is going to end up.
For color, Todd, if you do a cold ethanol extract,
exactly,
under ultrasonics, so like in a diamond scrubber thing, and you do that, and you only expose the cannabis to it for like half a minute, it comes out fucking beautiful golden color. There's no green, there's nothing. It's just really, really clean. You only get about 80% of the available THC. You don't get all of it, but you can do it a second time. But the first wash, it's really unbelievably clean if you try it.
Yeah, and that gets back down to a process that was created by the Butter King that coined the phrase BUDDER many years ago. If you look online, just Google the Butter King, you'll find an article that Dana Larson wrote about him. And it first started out, his first product was like a crystalline product that melted and then re-solidified when heat was applied. And from that, it got to a quick alcohol wash with a thin layer of evaporation and then a whip, so to speak. And Mel Frank and I wrote an article called The Art and Science Cleaning Concentrates Part 2. And it's all about the Butter King and his process and everything else. And
so the Butter King's only solvent was ethanol?
Was ethanol, which was...
I didn't even know that. Thanks.
Yeah. And his resulting compound is, bright, popping, beautiful color, doing it way back before anybody else was calling their stuff butter or anything else.
It had a super lot of taste in it still.
Yeah, a lot of fucking taste. Yeah. And besides that, deserving the credit for doing something so magnificent way back in the day, he's an incredibly nice man and he deserves the credit.
Nice. Hey, I just sent the link to my friend and your friend Sam, our friend Ryan, of Chimera Genetics. He's going to be jumping in if he didn't already. Ryan, can you hear us? Okay. Well, Ryan, if you could get your sound working, it'd be nice to have you on. Ryan has been working breeding for a number of years. I was telling you about him the other day. He's worked with a lot of great companies, and as soon as he gets sound, hold on, I can't really read that. I might need to work on settings. No problem. Try to get your settings right and then just come back into the room. But Sam, could you tell us a little bit about Ryan's work, the stuff that Chimera's done? He's done a lot of breeding for some of the legal LPs.
I think he should do his own explaining of his work, but he's an incredibly competent plant breeder, and I do not give praise lightly. And he also understands DNA, and he's a molecular biologist, and he's an all-around nice guy too. I mean, but for plant breeding, he's probably one of the top people you could get your questions answered by.
Well, we look forward to having him on. Fortunately, someone I spend a lot of time talking with. He's been a great teacher, and I've always enjoyed his presence. And hopefully,
He
gets
understands the situation in Canada very well.
Definitely, definitely. And well, hopefully, he gets back on and starts joining us on Saturdays. He's done a lot for cannabis, and that's kind of like the focus of all this. I mean, it's such an honor to have you guys around. I mean, to be able to wake up and spend my days with you, Kenny, is just it's the best weekend ever. But you know, you guys have all done things that I've really admired, and a lot of why I wanted to get us together and talking about this is so people, you know, could hear the stories and see the people that kind of came along first and wrote the books and created the procedures and, you know, started what we're doing kind of day to day now. I mean, if it wasn't for a lot of the efforts that went in, even by you alone, Sam, I mean, you know, what would the indoor growing scene be like if you take Skunk One out of the whole equation? It's not there.
It would have been replaced by Northern Lights, probably.
Do we know who created Northern Lights, for instance? That was a...
Yeah, it was created by an American Indian up in the Seattle area. And I'm trying to remember if his name was Greg or his son's name was Greg. I met his son, but I don't know him. And yeah, they passed it on to Neville, who spread it around the world.
Back in '92, I had a band called Northern Lights Number 5, and we called it that because we were reading High Times, and we figured only growers and smokers would know where it was, and it was. We had a bunch of growers and smokers come out to our shows, so just that, because people would ask, well, why the number 5? And we're like, oh, you know, just number 5, you know, to the lay person, because they're like, well, why the number 5?
Why not number 2? Because he had number 2 and number 5.
Yeah, he had numbers 1 through 6 from what he told me.
Correct. It was 1 through 6, but we just chose number 5.
2 and 5 carrying on.
Yeah, the five genetics gelled well with your old haze, which is the reason it became so famous. The other NLs 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 are actually in a lot of other what became Sensi strains.
And at the time, it was the strongest cannabis I had tried. I think I had gotten it in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And after I hit it, it was like, wow, that's great. And when I was looking for a name, I was like, there you go. So, because we always, it was a little 3-piece, so we used to always practice high, and so that when we played high, we didn't have any issues. So, you know.
you got to be in the right mindset.
Well, if you're going to have a band name like that, it's like, you know, look at Cypress Hill. You know, they've always been about cannabis. I mean, there's not a stage that Be Real has been on that he hasn't smoked cannabis, you know. And he has, I mean, they've enlightened and taken things and enlightened a lot of the youth. Whereas, you know, Woody, I mean, we were talking earlier about Willie and how he really is a lot of the older, but I mean, look how rap has embraced cannabis, and, you know, Cypress Hill and those guys were really, I mean, they showed you how to do the blunt. I remember the blunt issue in High Times. That was a big issue for people to have, or to even, you know, to talk about, or to show, you know, and that was when, you know, of course, when people were mixing tobacco with it, but it was still an underground movement from the street scene, so people could it was just a natural movement, you know, and it continues to be that way. I mean, look how many, you know, rap embrace cannabis better than heavy metal or rock and roll or any other type of music, you know, to cannabis, in my opinion. I mean, from what I have seen or listened to.
I agree with you totally. I mean, and you know, I completely concur with that. I mean, it's a different mindset, I think, in the artist too, if you will. Whereas a lot of the earlier artists that were potheads were hiding. I think the rappers used it to define themselves. And I think
well, it also was a connection to so many people all around the country. I mean, you saw it from, I mean, look at the people that showed up. I mean, for Cypress Hill to sell the albums that they sold, I mean, over the years, and look at that as they continue to sell out wherever they go, and to have been, again, completely cannabis friendly, and it's in almost every song. In fact, it's hard to name a song that you don't, you know.
Hear it in. Sure. Can you hear us, Ryan?
I can. Can you guys hear me?
Fantastic. Welcome to Talking Cannabis, brother.
Right on. Thanks.
Hey, could you introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about what you've done and what you're doing.
Oh, well, I've done some work with cannabis. I breed plants, so.
You smoked it before?
Yeah, I've spoken a couple of times.
Okay. As long as more than once, we're cool.
So, listen, I wanted to pop in and share some really cool news with you guys that I got this morning from our fellow researchers in the cannabis field. Martin Lee's son, Adrian DeWitt Lee, and Kevin McKernan have been doing some interesting work. They've discovered that cannabis produces endogenous pyrethrins, actually at levels that are 5 times what is allowable by the California limits in some varieties. So
wow,
who knows if it's what kind of variation we're seeing in the gene pool. It could be that there's some lines that are high expressors of these pyrethroids and some that are low expressors, and that could have something to do with, you know, pests.
Is there any links to any specific genetics currently?
Well, I don't know if it's been that far. I just got the paper. I haven't actually even finished reading through it to see if they've got that. But there's a research article that was just published called "Endogenous Synthesis of Pyrethrins by Cannabis." So if you Google that, you'll actually pull up the paper.
Can you, some of the people in the chat were like, what is he talking about? Could you just describe what pyrethrins are and what it means to the cannabis user?
Yeah, so pyrethrins are, you know, people have probably heard of chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum produces these compounds that are, it's actually a natural miticide. So in all the old grow books, you know, Ed and whatever, a lot of these books talk about, you know, using pyrethrin to spray on your plants to kill mites. And so when the California testing regulations have come out, they've created a set of regulations around, you know, how much of these products can be found in the final flower or the extract. And so they were, you know, in the course of testing up in Santa Rosa, some of these guys were coming, the growers were coming in, and they would test the flowers, and they'd see that they were exceeding the levels of, you know, allowed pesticide, right? And you know, when they talk to the growers and say, hey guys, we're spraying, we're finding all these pyrethrin on your flowers, and the growers would, you know, lose their mind because they'd been so adamantly careful in their production that they would not use any pesticides, and they swore up and down that they didn't spray anything on the plants. And so that led them into a whole series of research, and they actually figured out now that some varieties of cannabis are producing pyrethrins.
Mm.
Did they also look at ways that which
less
were growing?
susceptible to insect infestation?
Well, I don't think that whole second set of research hasn't been done. The initial research is that, wow, you know, the plant is actually producing these compounds that they thought were really exclusive to other species.
What's even more fascinating is they've decided and determined there was an acceptable and not acceptable level, and now this cultivar of cannabis is exceeding that acceptable level. Does that mean that nobody could legally grow that cultivar anymore because it's guaranteed to exceed an acceptable level set forth by the state? That's
Yeah, well,
kind of fascinating.
It's a whole new issue, right? I mean,
yeah, that opens up a whole can of fucking worms, because show me a piece of data that says that what's an acceptable level and what's a toxic level, and what is the parts per million you must not exceed, or nanogram, however you're going to form a measurement. You know, who sets forth that acceptable level, and what information are they going to base that opinion on? That's a crazy old can of worms.
Yeah, well, it would be really interesting to have Adrian DeWitt Lee come in and talk about these things, because he's done some really, when they released that that set of regulation, the new pesticide list, he did a real breakdown on it. So if you Google again his name is Adrian DeWitt Lee,
I just want to be there the day when he teaches monkeys to dab perithrins. You know what I mean? For this here study.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I mean, all this stuff is actually, California's actually been pretty good about creating a set of regulation that's based on science. I mean, they don't just pull these numbers out of the air.
Sure.
So there probably was some rationale behind the level that they set, right?
Sure. But it's funny that it's all based on what we thought we knew, and information like this tells us how much we don't know. That's kind of a fascinating thing to, just put a pull.
What part of the plant are the perithrins found? Is it in the resin? Is it in the flowers, the leaves, the stems? Anybody know?
I don't know, but I assume that it's in the leaves and the flower, because I mean, if they probably identified it through testing extract, is what I'm assuming. But again, I got to go back and read the paper, so I actually can't say that any of that information.
Even then, if it's just showing up in the extracts, I wonder how high is the level in the flower, and therefore how many times is it concentrated in the concentrate, times 10, times 20, 30, 50, whatever.
Yeah, well, that's it exactly. I mean, it does concentrate, right?
Yeah. It's all trickle up, trickle down, whatever you want to call it.
But you're right. You're very right in saying it's like, we think we know all this stuff about cannabis, but these are the things that are going to come out as cannabis has come into the light, and we're allowed to start doing more research on the plant.
Well, then, like I said, that leads to what is an acceptable level of perithrins for a person to consume at a given temperature, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And the prohibitions are going to turn around and say, this is just another reason why you can't grow or you can't consume,
unless we can show them different, right? Before they can even form that opinion.
Right.
It also makes me wonder how rare it is.
Yeah, exactly. How rare is it? How many varieties are producing?
Well, I just registered
some
a
level
new
of
variety. It's called perithrine free. So it's available under license by anybody.
All right.
All right. Hey, we have a question from Mike Digg over, and this question is for Sam and Chimera. Why do you guys put the gene pool seeds on the market opposed to narrowing down the selection during breeding, which would make it easier for the buyer?
Well, I mean, I'll take a shot at that. I think Sam and I both believe. I mean, listen, if you want a specific genotype, we can start selling clones in the new world. But I think Sam and I both have, been pretty clear about it in the past. It's like when you sell seeds and you make genetics available, I think we both believe that these are part of the global heritage. They're the their heritage of, I'm not going to say humanity, but of the earth. And so it really
we're mere caretakers. We don't own these things in any way, and I mean, we pass on what we can. We can't pass on everything. I don't have everything.
Well, but it's the best thing for you both to produce everything, because if you're the sole breeder and directing the breeding program, as we spoke about last week, if you like blue cheese and I don't, inevitably, possibly, you could end up choosing, say, the sweet one versus the pungent one. And so rather than do that, you're giving the gene pool to everybody to then breed and accentuate this quality, that quality, to produce the cultivars that they appreciate. Maybe they don't like blue cheese. Maybe they do want the skunky one, not the sweet one. So I commend you for releasing a larger gene pool rather than dictating to the customer what you think they should have.
I've really tried to not do in my breeding. I've tried to not do a lot of one-to-one hybrids, one male and one female. It's really a very unnatural way for cannabis to breed. Cannabis grew in fields in populations of many, many different plants. It's kind of a crude analogy, but it's like a big gangbang, right? I mean, there's pollen flying all over from all these different males and fertilizing all these different females. And that there's an inherent amount of genetic variation, and it's cannabis is called an outcrosser. It's an outcrossing species. So
it's an obligate outcrosser.
Yeah, an obligate outcrosser in nature, that's for sure. So humans are the same way. Like, you can't have kids without engaging, sexual recombination with another member of the human species, right?
You never heard of immaculate conception? Come on, man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so far, immaculate conception has not been shown in cannabis.
I'm fucking working on that. I'm working.
So it's not so immaculate, is what you're saying.
It's not so immaculate.
Patent that shit.
But yeah, that inherent method of breeding preserves genetic variation, right? There's something about obligate outcrossers that they carry around all this genetic variation.
Yeah.
So I think the question that was asked is probably, you know, a tip of the hat towards what's coming in the future. I'm sure that we will start seeing more, you know, under legalization. It's a lot easier to do this kind of breeding work. The way that it's been done up till now has always had a bit of a clandestine component.
Yeah.
And that's brought around a whole culture and a set of, you know, consequences, right? But I think in the future we will start seeing more true breeding lines or more uniform lines with fewer genotypes in them, so that people can plant seed and see a uniform result. But you know, as always with breeding, every time you get something, you give something else up.
Sure. Well, I wrote an article for Cannabis Business Times that kind of relates to this. You've known this for many, many years, both you and Sam. But let's call it the clandestine breeder of the past. I mean, the two tools at his disposal were thumb and forefinger, and he rubbed them on the plant and decided that was the male to breed with, more so than the information from, say, Phylos Bioscience or from Steep Hill. You know, some of the stuff they're doing. THC reports all the way through the life cycle of the plant, wet weight versus dry weight versus biomass, usable cannabis versus non-usable cannabis. And that combined data should reflect and dictate what male you breed with, what female you should breed with, more so than your thumb and forefinger. So,
well, it's the same information. It's you know, your thumb and your forefinger and your nose or your eyes even are like, you know, a set of traits to look at. But
sure,
having access to a lab is like having access to a sixth or seventh sense, right?
Yeah.
Like, start quantifying things that we couldn't before. I mean, you know, we all look at this book behind you, Kenny, over your left shoulder. It's like we can all agree that that's green, right? When we're talking about smells, it's not so easy. I mean, everybody interprets smell a little bit differently. So when one person smells skunky, somebody else might smell something else, right? But when you can run it through a GCFID and get a terpene profile on the plant, you know, you can start, you get a breakdown of what's in the smell, and then, you know, we can all look at that and say, oh, look, this one's got X amount of limonene or terpinolene or whatever the terpene is, right? So it's a different way of looking at the same information.
Sure.
And, you know, cannabis growers and breeders, we've done pretty good in the past 40 years. But again, as we come out of the shadows and into the light, we got a whole bunch of new tools that are in our toolbox. And
absolutely.
I think cannabis is really going to take off in the next 20 years. We're going to see some.
You're absolutely correct, because not only is there a whole bunch of new tools that can be used, genetic markers soon, but we'll also have new scientists, straight breeders of vegetables and fruit, and students right now who will embrace cannabis and breed for it. And that will upstep the level of quality in the future.
Yeah, you've already got people like Bam from the highest grade from Santa Cruz taking genetics classes at UC Davis. I mean, I think I mentioned that before, and that's really incredible opportunities that weren't afforded to us, especially because it's a heads-up situation. They know what his background is, and they know what his focus is. So, and they embrace him at this point. So it's really, really cool.
Yeah, I met Bam a couple of years ago at the Emerald Cup. We spoke on the panel together. I really like him. He's got a good heart and a good sense of the plant, and you know, I think he's really doing it for the right reasons.
Just a beautiful, sweet gentleman. I first met him up in Seattle a couple of years ago, and just I love his smile. I love to hug him. He's just an amazing man.
Yeah, he's you know, in that next generation of breeders that is, again, he's learned from his learned from the giants and is taking it to a whole new level. I look forward to seeing what he does.
Yeah, but also has major respect for his past as an Afghanian, in his ability to collect old landrace varietals through his father before he passed, and just really a reverence for the past and the future. So it's incredible to see that new generation coming up.
Absolutely.
I think it's fantastic, especially when you consider the inability to have access to all of the different genetics that were available, because a lot of what people were breeding with was happenstance to what they could get their hands on, not necessarily what they would like to have been breeding with.
And they did the best with what they had.
Yep.
But better yet, I mean, look at the wide diversity we've came up with in the past, say, 30 years, given prohibition. You know, what we've ended up with is things that you bred that you liked, you know what I mean? So it's kind of an interesting thing that now we have the ability to spread them to the masses and really super refine and figure out the palate. I mean, just because you like a Merlot doesn't mean that there's not 300 different kinds of Merlot within the so-called varietal, if you will.
Right.
Well, it's interesting too. I mean, this is really what it's been, as a big distributed breeding project, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many other species have been so, you know, taken care of or have been, you know, ushered through time by such a diverse group of custodians.
Yeah, that's what I really enjoyed about Robert Poland's A Botany of Desire. The marijuana story I didn't enjoy that much. Or the potato was okay, but I really enjoyed the story of the tulip. But most of all, the story of the apple and the genetic potential of the 5 seeds or X seeds of an apple. Just the 5 seeds from an apple have over a 2,000 genetic potential to come out, from very big, very small, from tasty to tasteless to everything in between. Really blew my head that there's so much genetic diversity in one fucking apple.
Right.
Yeah, well, that genetic variation is what allows species to colonize, you know, what are considered the margins of their refugia, right, of where they can exist. It's like you need to have that genetic variation to be able to go into a new environment and still survive. Because
sure, and if I watched the show on Darwin, and guy was pretty incredible. I mean, the amount of time he actually spent on the Galapagos was very, very small, checking out the the tortoises, the animals and stuff. But it was kind of fascinating. One of the things that fascinated me is he looked at an orchid in South America, and for something to pollinate it would have had to have had like almost a 24-inch tongue. So he pretty much hypothesized that possibly at nighttime, a moth came in with a 24-inch tongue and reached all the way to the bottom of this stem and pollinated that plant. He was long gone before scientists actually recorded on film a moth come up with a 24-inch tongue and stick it all the way down into the bottom of that orchid, but he was able to hypothesize and formulate very, very intelligent, concise theory and reasons why things were in existence now. And it was basically, how plants trick insects and stuff, and why they exist, and it kind of a fascinating show.
They kind of
so that's the Gene Simmons moth, then.
I believe
that
so.
is Gene Simmons' mother.
Yeah. Pretty wicked moth, but anyway. But yeah, how plants are much more intelligent than we think. I mean, for the cannabis plant to get humans to find it fascinating and so endear itself to us like an animal would, that we've, right now as we speak, there's 1,000 people in the world trying to cultivate the newest, latest varietal of cannabis, and I don't see them doing that with corn, potatoes, tomatoes, or anything else. Not private individuals at their house.
So again, because it's distributed it's this distributed breeding effort, this community breeding effort, and there's a lot of good that comes out of that. But I think, again, always when it's breeding, you get something, you also give something up. And it is a weakness of these distributed breedings that you have a lot of people that are selecting for a specific set of traits, but they're also selecting against a whole bunch of other set of traits unconsciously. Sure. And Rob said this back in Marijuana Botany in 81. It's like there's consequences when you make when you make these selections for relatively small pools in closets or small grow rooms. And as much as you might gain a bunch of things, we also end up building in, you know, genetic susceptibilities to things like powdery mildew and botrytis and bugs even.
Sure.
So
well, that's why I really like the tissue culture aspect, because you can keep your original specimens unadulterated, unmodified, and then play, breed, do whatever you want without really contaminating your original pool. And, you know, I really lament, you know, I mean, for a period of time, it was, and I'm sure you experienced this as well, purple varieties were very, very, very desirable. And then very quickly, once everybody had them, it went out of fashion. Everybody wanted the Kush OG varietals. And in that trend following, so to speak, we've lost a lot of stuff. I lament the stuff that we lost because, hey, I smoked it, didn't get me high. And it was like, yeah, but that had a really high level of this or that or this or that. And so the science aspect really, really excites me.
And definitely look at the haze, for instance. Back in the 90s, you couldn't find a cannabis cup in Amsterdam that didn't have some type of Neville cross of haze in it that people were loving. And then after the turn of the century, this shit's non-existent. The stuff they call amnesia haze in Holland is anything but haze.
It's all trend driven.
Should be called amnesia skunk is what it should be called, because it's way more like skunk than it is like haze.
So we lost all those purples, and now everybody was growing the OGs is now on to name a brand, and we're losing the OGs, you know.
Well, thankfully, we're not losing the OGs, but we totally are grateful for losing the purples. That shit sucked.
No, there was some that were magnificent, had very grapey flavors and stuff. There was some really incredible purples I enjoy and lament, and when they come back, I will always embrace. Yeah, I like it.
Most of the purples, for whatever reason, were very unappealing, and especially we used to get a lot of purple genetics in Holland, and they all sucked, in my opinion. I have seen a few that I like. You're right, but. I don't know. Usually when I see purple pot, I think, oh, that's not going to do much for me.
You know, the good stuff stayed on the mainland, man. We never get.
Well, it goes both ways. I mean, there definitely is a lot of purple crap.
Yeah, but
a lot of the rope-a-dope that, you know, and Sam will talk about this, but a lot of the rope-a-dope in Switzerland is purple, right?
Oh.
But there also are things like the granddaddy perps and
the that's I'm talking about the legends, you know, the granddaddy perp, the purple kush that I developed, and a bunch of others that were really choice.
Yeah, that was actually
and even then I you know, they you know, they were, you know, 12 to 16% THCs. They weren't super high, but they were magnificent in there. They're, like I said, those grapey flavors, or, you know, whatever fruity flavors you had to mix them with something savory, be it a high THC content.
Do you have terpene profiles of any of those?
No, unfortunately, no. It was before my time. I was fortunate enough to work with El Soli in 1996, and he gave me THC reports of 11 of my cultivars in 1997. But yeah, there was nobody going to give you a terpene profile report at that point. So I really lament that.
So you got cannabinoid profile?
Yeah, a lot of those purples are they're myrcene dominant with pinene in them. It's the major profile. If you actually look at the NAPRO classification system that was talked about recently, you know, there's a whole purple class.
It depends also if they're wide leaf indica background or narrow leaf indica background. Then their terpene profiles, I imagine, are quite different.
But one thing that was interesting that came out in that research was a lot of the purples, like I said, they have this myrcene pinene dominant terpene profile. And there's another plant that's also very popular in the Bay Area and in Humboldt and Mendo and all that, actually all over California. And that has a similar terpene profile, and it's in the same flavor class as those purples. And that's the non-pinene dominant version of Blue Dream.
Is it purple?
It's in the purple class. It's in what we call the purple class.
So the plants are a bit purplish colored.
No, it's because remember, the color class system is based on terpene profile, not morphological characteristics.
Okay, so that's why I was asking for clarification.
Yeah, no, the plant itself is not purple, but it smells like the purples. And the reason I found that so interesting was because it seemed to me that was like a regional preference for a specific variety, like a specific flavor profile, right? Like those Granddaddy Purps and everything were so popular in the Bay Area for a while.
Yeah.
That I think what happened is when the growers went up to the hill and they were growing these purples, which do have some, you know, because of their Afghani heritage.
Mhm.
Sorry, there's a motorcycle going by. Because of these Afghani heritage in them, a lot of them had these powdery mildew problems, and there's certain yield trade-offs too that you get with growing those broadleaf, you know, classic Afghanica plants. They just don't yield what the hybrids do, right? And so when the growers were probably selecting for that Blue Dream cutting, they realized that these plants, or maybe it was subconscious, maybe it was conscious, but either way, they selected plants that had the same smell profile or at least the same flavor class, but they ended up on a frame that was so much bigger than, you know, what the Granddaddy Purposes produce. I mean, you guys have all seen those Blue Dream giants up in Mendo and Humboldt. I mean, they produce 10, 15 pounds of flower.
Hey, the kids have something called a meme now, and they say they don't like that Blue Dream no more. They make jokes about it, yo.
Yeah, well, Blue Dream, it's a haze. It's not a haze. It's myrcene dominant. It's not a haze at all.
I'm just looking at that like, hey, kid, you spent 15 minutes making something called a meme. Why don't you do something more productive with your fucking time?
Can I ask you guys something?
Cannabis curmudgeons come out, huh?
Yeah, I'm just like, God damn, if you put all the fucking meme energy into a goddamn labor pool, you could pretty much feed a small nation. I'll just say that.
Hilarious. I forgot what I was gonna fucking ask you, so you just threw me. So I was like, I had a question and then it just went away. So,
Was it about plant breeding?
technically, I think it was. Yeah,
He was going to say he likes Blue Dream. See?
I do actually. I do like Blue Dream. So they'll just.
I don't hate on any
I got
plant.
nothing against the plant.
I don't hate on any plant. You won't, and I won't be making no meme.
And I won't be making no weed. No, you know, but that what? Okay, this was my question. I was looking at the Phylos Galaxy the other night, and I was looking at Trainwreck, and Trainwreck was saying that one of its relatives was one of the earlier skunk cuttings, 79. I think Phylos listed it as a 1979 skunk, and I thought to myself, could Trainwreck be a byproduct of that acrid version of skunk that you bred away from, Sam?
Really good question.
Not to me, but I really don't know Trainwreck as good as I should. I mean, I've smoked it a zillion times with friends, but I don't know it in a way to make a statement.
It's musky, but it's not hazy to me. And I've had people mistakenly say, "Oh, that must be haze," and I'm like, "No."
What you should try to do is find GC analysis of both of them so you can compare.
Right onto that. Yeah, right onto that. I wish the Phylos Galaxy had actually more information of the samples instead of just.
I think that is their goal. I hope so, amongst other things, yes. If they had terpene and cannabinoid profiles for mature buds, that would be really, really enlightening, I would think.
Then my question is when they're showing direct, I forget their terminology for it, but they're getting a lot of samples in under different names that are actually all the exact same clone. And correct?
I think that's what they said that's happening.
Right, and it's interesting.
But you're talking about with multi-poly hybrids, correct?
Yes. Things like OG Kush, for instance, is coming into them 20 times over, but it's been called.
If 10 different people name it 10 different names and it's all the same clone, then what you're saying is going to happen. I'm sure it does.
I got the Tahoe OG versus the San Fernando Valley OG.
Exactly.
And it's
clones.
like, wait a minute, what does that even mean? Well, it means my cousin came down to San Fernando, got it from me, and took it to fucking Tahoe.
That's right. That's exactly what it is.
Not,
so Tahoe and SFG
but nobody yell at me because I'm not saying that's what happened in that situation. I don't know that situation. don't nobody say that I was trying to spread that story. I was just using that as an example.
There's people at Tahoe.
Hey, what do you got against Tahoe, dude?
But I don't want them yelling at me. I was just using that as an example.
As an example. But they both are on the Phylos list is exactly the same plant.
Well, I didn't say
Tahoe and SFVOG. Blame
Yeah, well-
science.
Well, one of the things about the Phylos work is that, you know, and it's the same problems that these labs suffer from. You can only analyze what gets brought to you.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're not running a cultivation alongside your lab, it's really hard to figure a lot of these things out. You're just subject to what people grow for you. And it's like you said, you know, those purples disappear when fashion changes and people stop growing the same plants.
They change like socks.
Yeah, they change. It's a good way to say it. But essentially, what happens is yesterday's socks get tossed out, and then they're underrepresented in the sample.
Yeah, but today we can save them in tissue culture, and that's magic.
Well, listen, I've done a lot of tissue culture. It's not as easy and
no
scalable as everybody thinks it is. It's not like you can just take a leaf sample and put it in a freezer somewhere and come back like 10 years later and pull it out. You know, we're working towards that, and we've done a lot of research towards that end, creating a cryopreservation system for cannabis where you essentially, you know, can freeze a meristem or a callus sample and then bring the plant back out of stasis, as it were. But it still is a lot of work. I mean, you got to go in every 2 weeks and reculture it. It's like a plant that you have to transplant.
How long can you keep callus without having to be constantly rerouting a small piece of it? I know I kept it for a year or two, but without changing the agar or nutrients or anything. But then it totally outgrew the tube, and I had to cut off a little piece of it and move that to another clean tube with nutrient in it.
Hey, can you guys, I get asked it all the time, but yeah, for the sake of the conversation, can you guys define what an F1, an F2, and an F3 is? Ryan? We lost
Sam,
Ryan.
you want to take that one?
Ryan, can you just define what is an F1, an F2, and F3?
Yeah, so an F1 is a cross between two true breeding varieties. So it's the first generation cross when you take two varieties that, you know, all share a set of traits. Like, it's kind of hard to consider in today's market because there aren't a lot of true breeding varieties. But, you know, a good one example is Skunk Man. It's been bred for a long time and relatively stabilized, and most of the plants look almost identical. And if you take that variety and you hybridize it to another variety, say like an Afghan 1, for example, then the resulting progeny are considered an F1 or a first generation filial hybrid. And so the F in F1 stands for filial. It just means related by, you know, but they're siblings essentially. They're related by brother or sisterhood.
Do the genetics from the parent plants have to be very different? Like let's take an F1 of NL5 by Hayes, where the Hayes male was a 16-week equatorial and the NL5 was a fast flowering, you know, broad leaflet drug variety. Together they made a 10-week F1, correct? Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the thing about the hybrid vigor, which is the status that comes in a hybrid plant from crossing two unrelated types, is really due to something called heterosis. We call it hybrid vigor, but what it really is in the plant and animal breeding world is heterosis, and that just means like it's a state of increased growth in the plant, higher performance in the plant compared to the parentals. And a lot of times that's due to traits that become fixed or inbred in the two true breeding parental lines, right? And then when you cross the two different types together, you end up with this increase in vigor or increase in performance compared to the parental types.
Right.
To make it really simple, 1 and 1 equals 3 in an F1 that's done well.
Right. With the way that the vigor and the increase in yields and all the beneficials from bringing the two plants together.
They can also be quite consistent sometimes.
Right. I think
the population will look pretty consistent.
So I think of Simon Schmidt, because Simon, that owns Serious Seeds, only sold F1 seeds. All his whole line was plants that he held, that he made F1s of. He never sold anything but F1s, in my knowing Simon and what he's told me. But now my question is, Ryan, is if the genetics are closer in relation than, let's say, the example of NL5 Hayes by Hayes, NFL number 5 by Hayes, you're not going to see the benefits of an F1, because you're going to see more cousins and type of populations coming out. You won't have that consistency. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that heterotic effect, that hybrid vigor effect, comes because you've crossed two distantly related plants, essentially, right? So the farther removed of the heritage of the plants are that you're crossing, usually the higher the heterosis, right? And more that usually just comes. Every family, for example, if you look at any family and you start inbreeding within a group, call it like whatever. I mean, white people, black people, Chinese people, Asian people of Asian descent or whatever. It's like every group has genetic weaknesses built into their gene pool, right? And so when you breed within type over and over and over again, those genetic weaknesses become a little more prevalent in the population, right? So there's a good example is Orthodox Jewish people. There's a certain set of conditions that are way more. One of them called Tay-Sachs disease, but there's a few of them, and there's a whole set of potential genetic pitfalls that come from breeding within a family or within a certain type, right? Because remember, going back to what we said earlier, cannabis and humans are obligate outcrossers. The natural state is to breed with other, right, rather than breed with same. And so when you start breeding with same, you end up with these genetic weaknesses. It's why we it's a taboo topic, but there's a reason we don't breed with our brother and sister, right? Like probably at some point in time in history we did, right? That probably happened. You'd see guys or you'd see families that were like, in pre-humans or whatever, or maybe even in early humans, where we were breeding with our brothers and sisters. And then we realized pretty quickly, holy fuck, like we get all these potential genetic weaknesses come right out very quickly. And so that's where the taboo came from. I mean, it's not just, we didn't just pop up here on the planet thinking that it was taboo. I mean, we obviously learned that it was the wrong way to go about doing things, right?
Right.
So
wow, that's a great way to, but that's what's happening in the cannabis world right now, because people are just, they're not breeders in a majority of my experience dealing with all these seed companies. They're mixers. They're mixing together varieties that are very close in relation, and the seeds that they're putting out are not consistent.
Even if what you're saying is true, let's say it is for the moment, if enough mixers do some mixing, the cream will rise to the top, and still some great clones can be gathered. So, I mean, in the short run, I'm not sure it matters. In the long run, what really needs to be conserved is land races from different areas that are unpolluted. And that's just so that they will be available to future breeders in the future, the way they existed. And they need to be reproduced in large populations. I mean, with 2,000 male, 1,000 male and 1,000 female, you can save almost the entire gene pool and conserve it. With less plants than that, you're losing genes. And to really do it successfully, you need populations more like 10,000 or more. Then you're not losing anything. You're just shuffling the frequency of the genes.
Yeah, I feel kind of different ways about that. I mean, I know everybody says that you go back to land races, and land races are true and stable and all that kind of stuff, but I don't really think that's true. Land races are defined as heterogeneous populations of heterozygotes, right? And that essentially what that means is they're like, it's like you're saying, in a population, there's a whole bunch of variation, right? And that variation is constantly being shuffled every time there's like a sexual recombination event. So every time there's a mating, essentially, you get that genetic shock.
Probably the larger the population, the less the effect of the reshuffling, and it's more of a constant norm. But yeah, I know they change because also too, man has been selectively altering and selecting the seeds or the plants that he wants, and that changes everything. So,
And thus
But
the
that
common
also-
change of
also
genetic diversity.
Yeah, that proves my point. Also, I mean, if you are selecting and changing it, if man is selecting it and changing it, then that proves that there is genetic variation buried in the population, right? You have to have variation
for man to have successful selection, I
Exactly.
agree.
Yeah.
So,
So,
then,
while stuff may look uniform, there still is a bunch of genetic variation. Sorry, Todd. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to ask you then subsequently, how do you get to a F2 and F3, Ryan?
So an F2 is when you take two individuals from the F1, or you can actually take the whole F1 and open pollinate it against each other. So the two means, the two means second generation, the two in F2. And again, the F stands for filial. So it means a family breeding within family one more time after the F1 generation. And that is where you get your, this huge variation in genetic recombination. It's because it's what's called sexual recombination, right? You end up with some chromosomes from grandma, getting paired up again with different chromosomes from grandpa, kind of thing. So it's a new set of genetic combinations that we hadn't seen in the F1.
What
So an
what normally happens in the F2 is 25% of them will look like the mother, 25% like the father, and 50% spread somewhere in between.
Yeah, that's a gross oversimplification.
Absolutely making it simple.
Yeah, I think that's true if you say, for one trait, 25% look like the grandpa or the father, 25% look like the mother, and 50% are the hybrid class. But it's really like, for example, that could be leaf shape or width. Like if you cross, like Todd was saying, the Afghanica Northern Lights 5 type to a haze, narrow leaf type, the F1 hybrid is going to have long leaflets that are, intermediate width. But if you cross two of those plants from the F1 together, then you see the full spectrum again. You get the wide leaves, you get the narrow leaves, and you get the hybrid class.
Absolutely. I've done it. I've seen it. It's absolutely true.
Right.
Yeah.
This is also why Cali Mist seeds, why Serious seeds were always so consistent. Because
when you bought them from Simon, they were consistent. But when you bought them from like White Label or whoever the hacker was that took his work and reproduced it, they're not uniform. And I think that, as that was probably one of the reasons why Simon did what he did in releasing hybrid seeds, is they're harder to knock off. They're harder to, when I buy Simon seeds and then cross them to themselves and try to make them to sell on the market, they're not as uniform as what Simon put on the market.
That's exactly what Simon explained to me. By putting out F1s, we get good consistency, we get hybrid vigor, and we get what he was intending when he bred the two plants together, which was something that was faster. In the Cali Mist example, it's the opposite of NL5 by Hayes, because the female plant is the 16-week long flowering equatorial, and the male plant is the shorter 8-weekish Afghan-based plant that he uses. And when he gets them together, he gets something similar to the NL5 by Hayes, but different. But he does get about a 10-week on average flowering time out of two plants. That one was a 16, one was an 8. But it still smells like, smokes like, tastes like, more like the equatorial than it does like the Afghan father. So
the real work comes though at the F2. Like, I mean, it's great that Simon puts out those F1 seeds because, like you said, you get a reduction in flowering time. But if somebody like a real plant breeder that had a lot of space to grow, and Simon, he's a good breeder. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything bad about Simon, but in the future, when you can plant like an acre of cannabis or 2 acres of one variety, if you were to take those F2 seeds, the seeds that you created by breeding the F1s together, and you planted out like a whole acre of that F2 of the hybrid cross, you might find a plant that is completely hazy, but in an 8-week frame with the yield of the Afghan side, right? And so that's even better than the hybrid plant that's 10 weeks, right?
Listen, I got to say, I had a friggin' plant 20 years ago, this afternoon, that was called Babylon, that used to flower for me in under 8 weeks and smelled like and tasted like haze. It only had 5 leaflets on any leaf. Didn't matter. Top leaf, 20-foot plant, wouldn't matter. The thing was still just 5 leaflets, and the leaves looked like they were designed by Black & Decker. The way that the serrades were so sharp and they would protrude up a bit, it was just amazing. And it was probably one of the plants I lamented on losing the most, because it was so unique compared to so many of the other plants I had, because in order to get that haze smell or that haze taste, I was kind of in the 11+ weeks category. And I didn't find anything under 9 weeks that remotely smelled or tasted like haze, except for Babylon. I've never seen it again.
It's again that linkage. There's something called linkage, and that's essentially how close are 2 separate traits on the same chromosome, right? So the closer 2 traits are on the chromosome, the tougher it is for them to be inherited separately. Right? They usually come as a mixed pair. So, for example, if you got that, like you said, the width of the leaf, that classical Afghan type leaf, is tied with a specific flavor. Let's just call it myrcene dominance or whatever. But the haze has either a limonene or a terpinolene or a pinene dominant flavor that comes hand in hand with the narrow leaf. Those 2 traits are on the same chromosome and close on the same chromosome. It's hard to split up that pairing of narrow and pinene versus wide and myrcene, right?
Yeah.
You got to grow a lot of plants to be able to break the linkage in the F2 and find a plant that is, for example, wide leaves with a pinene dominant terpene profile.
So can I ask you this then? Is F3 just a similar effect of F2?
No, it's where you start. It's actually when you have your 2 parentals, they're very different, and you cross the 2 parental types together to get your F1, you get uniformity. Okay, so all the plants kind of look the same, but in your F2, that's when that variation comes back. You see all this hidden variation that you didn't see in the F1, and then if you do good selections in your F2 and you choose plants that are approaching your goal, then F3 starts to become more uniform, right? F3, F4, F5 are essentially the road back to
F1.
Well, no, they're the road back to true breeding.
Yeah.
Right. And once you get true breeding, then you can again make another F1.
But
right, when you cross
what I've found so far is that it's harder to make a variety true breeding. Some of them are easy. Some of them are just they just want to segregate out into red and white instead of remaining pink.
That said, how many different terpene categories, guys, do you think there should be? The Emerald Cup just went to do the Cannabis Country Fair, and I believe they had 6 categories for the different varieties. Do you think that's correct? Do you think there should be more? How many do you think there should be? Any of you? You especially.
But essentially, how many there's going to be is how much we break down the subclasses. But I think the 6 is too small. I think they, in the terpene classes that Alec was talking about, they kind of missed a couple. The NAPRO work is the one so far that I would say is the closest to true, but I think the NAPRO class probably misses out on a couple that we're going to see as time goes on. I've heard whisperings of, Bisabolol dominant or Guayol dominant varieties. There's Etienne DeMeyer mentions in a paper that there's a carine dominant variety, which is not seen in the NAPRO classification system. So, it's kind of like we in my ecology class in university, we did this experiment where you walk into a forest and everybody lines up, along, say, 200 meters width, and then you walk 100 meters and you drop down a meter square. It was like a meter by a meter grid, and you just drop it on the floor, then you count the number of species that are in it, and you identify the number of species that are in that 1 meter on the floor, right? And then what happens again is you pick up your meter square and you walk another 10 or 100 meters and you drop it on the floor again. And it's most likely that the species that you found in the first square are going to be re-represented again in the second square, right? However, you might find a new species, right? You might find something that you didn't see growing in that first sampling, right? But as you walk another...
Ryan? Oh, man, right in the middle of what he was saying. Can you continue, Sam?
The more squares you go, the more you're not going to find new things, and it's going to be just basically a repeat of the first one.
Right, depending on approximation.
Now let's see if I'm 99.9% correct or just full of crap.
We'll just go with educated guesses. They're cool too.
It sounded good, man. It sounded good.
It
Sorry,
did.
you have shitty internet today.
Sam kind of finished what you were thinking, but could you finish what you were thinking too?
I don't know where I cut out, but essentially what happens is the more you sample, the more you find new things. But as you sample over and over and over again, you're less likely to find new things, right? And so at a certain point,
you guys are cracked from the same egg for sure. Sam, you were right.
Well, that's because we both gave the answer to the question, and that made it more likely that it was going to be the same.
I love it. I love it. Well, guys, you know, we've been on this a couple hours plus. I want to thank you all for joining us today. You always, Kenny and Sam. I love it. Etienne. It looks like we lost Richard, but thank you, Richard, for joining us from Italy. Next week, we will have Tom, Mel Frank, and maybe even Rob Clark as soon as the internet graces him with speed.
And possibly Nick. We'll try to drag him in. Nick, you coming?
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be really awesome.
Well, everybody, anything else you guys wanted to say before we close off? Ryan, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you wake up more Saturdays and come hang out and talk cannabis with us.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It was a blast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak with you guys always. We'll do it again.
It's a pleasure to have you on, Ryan.
Etienne, thanks for waking up on Saturday morning after your vacation.
No problem. Sorry, I didn't have a plug for you, but hopefully.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. 4 stores in 20 minutes to get a headphone splitter, and I still didn't pull it off. And Sam, thank you for staying up late and joining us as always. You're a pleasure.
No problem.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Etienne.
All right, everybody, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next Saturday.
Ciao.
Ciao. Let me hit the button.
Ciao.